Apologies for the late start. We've had transport issues with the trains. Excuse me. Good evening. I'm Councillor Julie Hart, and I would like to welcome you to this full council meeting. There are no scheduled fire drills tonight, so in the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main entrance doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point located beyond the multi-storey car park on Exchange Road. If you are unable to use the stairs, please wait in the chamber and you will be guided by a member of staff to the evacuation lift. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we are not able to live stream tonight's meeting. However, we are still able to record tonight's meeting and it will be uploaded onto the Council's YouTube website. You should be aware that the Council is the data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during the webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published retention policy. Any member of the public seated in the public gallery may be filmed by the automated camera system and your image may be captured. Therefore, by entering the meeting room, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. Members are reminded to take notice of what is displayed on the screens in the room, as these show what is being recorded. It is best that members remain seated when speaking, as the cameras are currently set to capture you in seated positions. However, if you do stand, please look at the TV screen to ensure that your head has been captured. Please do not move the microphones too close to you. You can request to speak by pressing the button with the face on it, and the microphone will go blue. The order of speakers will be controlled by Democratic Services. The microphone will go green when you are live. Members have received an electronic copy of the relevant paperwork for this meeting. The public agenda for this meeting is available on the Council's website. Thank you. We will now start the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Peck and Councillor Sivaraja.
Thank you. Councillors' interests notified in advance of the meeting are set out from page 5 in the supplementary agenda order paper. Are there any further interests councillors wish to declare? The minutes of the last full council meeting held on the 13th of December. Sorry, I couldn't see. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any others? No. Okay. Okay.
I suppose I should declare an interest as a member of the West Sussex County Council too. Thank you.
Is that in relation to which item?
Just generally, in case I mention it, Madam Mayor.
Budget.
Budget. Okay, in case I mention it.
23 are on pages 5 to 41. Are those set of minutes agreed? Excuse me. I will now provide you with a mayoral update. The period leading up to Christmas was very busy with various carol services around the town, especially my own service at St Margaret's Church in Ifield. That really was the start of Christmas for me, but how long ago it seems. The start of 2024 began quietly, and on the 27th of January, I joined with councillors and residents to commemorate National Holocaust Day by planting a weeping willow tree in the Memorial Gardens. I also met with the Mayor of Dalston to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the town twinning. I attended Crawley Museum just last week for the launch of the latest exhibition of science fiction costumes, and had the pleasure of attending St Andrew's Church in Furness Green with a number of veterans from the Armed Forces Veterans Breakfast Club for a concert by the Band of the Welsh Guards, and a wonderful evening that was enjoyed by everyone there. As we look forward to spring, I'm looking forward to the many events around the town that are already filling the diary. As you will see from the order paper on page 7, there are some Cabinet members' announcements. I will take them in the order they are listed. Councillors Yasmin Khan on 2 items, followed by Councillor Bob Noyce. There will be a combined maximum of 10 minutes for these communications. Councillor Yasmin Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, it's regarding the CCTV. Our existing CCTV cameras have been replaced by 50 new high-definition cameras. They will be operational from 31st of March 2024 in the town centre, shopping praise and across the borough. These high-definition cameras will operate well in low-light conditions, which will help in identifying individuals engaged in crime and disorder, or in times of emergency help to locate vulnerable individuals in public spaces, such as a lost child or those in need of urgent medical attention. The project has cost a total of $199,265, and working closely with Sussex Police, we were able to secure funding from the Home Office of $68,470, with Crawley Borough Council contributing $130,794 towards the system. This has been an exceptionally complex project which has been completed in a short time frame to ensure that we can maintain a CCTV provision in Crawley, which is a vital tool in keeping residents and visitors safe. That's that. And the second announcement is regarding a community safety event. It's called Let's Talk. So we are pleased to announce that the Let's Talk community safety event will be taking place in Town Hall on Thursday, 7th of March 2024 at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Residents will have a chance to voice their concerns, discuss them with community safety decision makers and help make Crawley safer. The event will feature an engaging discussion with representatives from Crawley Borough Council, Sussex Police and West Sussex County Council. A special guest sharing their experience of exploitation and gangs, and there will be a performance by young people from Audio Active Crawley, supported through the Crawley Safer Partnership. You can sign up now and contribute to make Crawley a safer place. To register your attendance, I've got an email address which I can give now if anybody wants to make a note, or we can send it out. It's the Crawley Development Team. You can contact them by the 5th of March to register your interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noyce.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to announce our brand new waste fleet. We've taken possession of 15 brand new waste vehicles at a cost of £3 million, and these consist of 14 26-tonne vehicles and one 18-tonne vehicle, which will collect rubbish, recycling and garden waste. They're expected to last 10 years and be working 5 days a week all the year round. They are narrower than their predecessors, which makes them a lot more manoeuvrable in some of the tighter spots in town, and that's very useful. They've got the capability to utilise HVO fuel, which typically produces 90% lower carbon emissions than traditional diesel. Competition was undertaken with local schools to find names for the vehicles, and there will be an announcement on the winners and a presentation and a photo shoot at Crawley Football Club and with the Youth Academy and BIFA in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to item 5, public question time, which is set for 30 minutes. I will briefly explain the procedure. I will invite each person in turn to the table at the front of the public seating area to ask their question. Please state your name, which ward you live in, and then ask your question. Please remember that questions cannot repeat any question that has already been asked tonight or within the last 6 months. I will then invite the most appropriate councillor to reply to your question. You may then ask one supplementary question which should relate to your original question or the response given to it. You may then, a written public question has been submitted in advance and the response has been provided. I will ask the requester, if present, if they wish to ask a supplementary question to the response. Are there any other people who wish to ask a question? Would you like to step forward, please, sir?
My name is Bob Burgess. I am a resident of Three Bridges. Do I go? Yeah, okay. Some years ago, a decision was made that the late Alderman Alan Quine should be honoured by having a suitable epitaph, be it a name, road name or a housing block or similar, named after him. Since that time, other people have also been honoured. I can think of the late Geraint Thomas, who had a housing development named after him relatively quickly after he had passed away. Also, the late Raj Sharma had a property named after him. Ironically, I believe that the property was built on the site where former councillor, group leader and mayor Howard Bloom used to live. Sadly, no recognition of Howard by way of honouring him. And one final point concerning Alan Quine. I understand he served with great distinction in the RAF. Madam Mayor, is this how we treat our veterans? By promising them something and forgetting all about it? Why is it taking so long to honour Alan Quine? And when are we likely to see a resolution? Thank you.
Councillor Jones, can I ask you to reply to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I assure Mr Burgess that nobody's forgotten the late Alderman Quine? Essentially what's happened, Madam Mayor, is that Alan Quine represented Pound Hill North, and with our councillors, as a council, we tend to try and dedicate buildings or roads in the wards that they represented. Now, the opportunities for these don't always come along every day, and with Alan's dedication of a road, it is in a phase of Forge Wood that has not yet gone ahead. It is going to go ahead quite soon. Sadly, it got held up by water neutrality to a certain extent, but he has been by no means forgotten. I can assure Mr Burgess of that, and indeed. We have taken the opportunity to dedicate buildings to the late Geraint Thomas and Raj Sharma, and it was absolutely right we did so because they were prominent buildings within the wards that they represented. So I really don't want anyone to think that we've forgotten anyone, and we will when an opportunity arises for everyone as appropriate do something if we can.
Do you have a supplementary question, Mr Burgess?
Yes, I'd like to take issue with Councillor Jones on his last comment concerning Councillor Geraint Thomas. Geraint Thomas was never had been a councillor representing the town centre where the development in his name is placed. He was, I believe, a councillor for... No, the town centre and Northgate are separate. They always were separate. Well...
Mr Burgess, may I ask you what your question is, please?
Well, I was querying the accuracy of what Councillor Jones was saying.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
There have been a a few boundary changes in the wards recently, Madam Mayor, but I'm afraid I don't agree with Mr. Burgess on this. I think it's an appropriate location to dedicate something to the late Grant Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Is there anybody else? Okay, thank you. We will now deal with agenda item 6, consideration of full council recommendations and call-in decisions. There are 5 recommendations under this item from the committees before the council this evening. The recommendations come from the Cabinet held on the meeting on the 31st of January 2024. Recommendation 1, 2023-2024 budget and council tax, starting on page 92. Also enclosed in the supplementary agenda on page 19 is the Labour Amendment 1 to Recommendation 1, 2024-2025 budget and council tax. This is an update report, FIN/650, to the original 2024-2025 budget and council tax report, FIN/642, and contains an amendment to Recommendation 1A following the recent announcement of additional government funding. As such, this amendment will be moved with the main report rather than as a separate amendment. Before we start the recommendations, I'm going to explain the procedure for the budget debate, and as with tradition for the budget and council tax item, I will be inviting speeches by each of the group leaders on the report. They will be given 10 minutes to do so. I will then open up the meeting to the main debate, on the main report and recommendations and the amendment. I will invite councillors to speak in turn, rotating between each of the groups where possible. At the conclusion of the debate, I will then allow the leader to have his right to reply, and I will call for a vote on the budget recommendation. Please remember that all budget votes, including amendments, will be held by a recorded vote in line with legislation. With that having been said, Councillor Michael Jones, Leader of the Council, you have 10 minutes to move Recommendation 1 on the 2024-25 budget and council tax, including the clerical amendment, and to present your speech on the report. Please introduce the recommendation and clerical amendment. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight I'm presenting the budget to the Council. It is a solid budget that is designed to take us through the tough times for local government that have been forced on us by the current government. Despite a strong record on financial management here in Crawley, the Council is receiving £8.9 million less support annually from central government in real terms than we did back in 2010 when it was first elected. And our overall spending power as a council has fallen by 69%. It is a minor miracle that we have been successful as we have in ensuring that frontline services have been protected by as much as they have. But inevitably, this means that we have to take action to do all we can to ensure that we get through the next year, despite in some cases the spiralling costs the council is facing through no fault of our own. As an aside, Madam Mayor, I noticed this week that our esteemed Member of Parliament for Crawley, Henry Smith, has been busy using the local paper to try and put out Tory government propaganda that somehow the additional £800,000 this council has been given was somehow a massive benefit to the council. I mean, this is the same tactic where the Conservatives try and dazzle members of the public with large-sounding sums of money. They used to do it all the time, for those of us old enough to remember, back in the 90s with the NHS. Yes, this is a large sum of money, but our public institutions are large ones with correspondingly large expenditure. I suppose what's really disappointing is that as a former council leader himself with a background in local government, Henry Smith knows this. Instead of putting this borough first and speaking out on this sheer dereliction of duty from the government, he instead is doing their PR for them. Who knows, we may hear more from the opposition on this theme later tonight. The truth is, Madam Mayor, that an additional £800,000 is less than £8 extra for every resident in Crawley Borough. Now, if the costs of the services we delivered per person had only risen by this amount, this would not be a problem, but of course it far exceeds that. As members can see from the budget report at table 2 and page 30, this doesn't even cover the cost of inflation, which is at £1.3 million. On top of this, there are significant service-related expenditure that is out of control of the council, like temporary accommodation. Part of this additional £800,000 was a small last-minute increase from the government of £137,000, which is what our amendment reflects, so hopefully that's clear to members on the Labour amendment. This was announced as part of the final settlement on the 5th of February. Now, a change of funding of this level from the provisional settlement announced in December is unprecedented and shows the level of need in the system. But this is such an inadequate rise that our finance officers have calculated that it won't even cover 1 week of this council's increased temporary accommodation bill. Local government deserves so much more than this treatment, and Crawley certainly deserves so much more. There's an inherent structural problem in the local government finance system, Madam Mayor. It doesn't allow a mechanism for councils to deal with high levels of inflation because there is significantly more expenditure, for example, paying contracts, that will increase with inflation with only limited scope to increase discretionary fees and charges, which form a much smaller proportion. This does not assist us because we have a statutory duty to set a balanced budget now. There will also be work needed over the coming year to ensure that we're in the right place for the following year's budget. The general fund budget assumes a council tax increase of 2.99% or £6.76, which is below the referendum limit of 3%. This will result in an increase of less than 13 pence a week of the borough's part of the Precept for a Band D property. The budget also assumes that fees and charges are increased at 7% where feasible. While the rate has fluctuated, this is around the rate inflation was over the past year and reflects the council's cost increases. We were able to increase fees and charges by less than inflation last year, but increasing pressures mean we cannot repeat this again this year. We have, however, tried to strike a balance, and this increase still compares very favourably to nearby councils, which are either on a par or higher. I understand West Sussex County Council are increasing their fees and charges by 8% and Mid Sussex District Council by 10.3%. This level has been chosen because we are trying to strike a balance between affordability and the actual costs facing the council. The general fund budget for 24-25 forecasts to take from balances of £1.065 million. That's an improvement from the £1.2 million in the budget report, which was reduced by the increase in the funding guarantee grant announced in January, which was too late to be included in the budget papers when they were published, and is reflected in the amendment contained within the supplementary agenda. The drawdown from reserve is £53,000 more than forecast in the budget strategy in November. However, the identified service expenditure pressures have worsened significantly. The main additional pressures being an additional £1 million for temporary accommodation and £630,000 for the town hall and the district heat network. These increases have been balanced by a favourable increase in the level of business rates. For us, temporary accommodation is still the elephant in the room. I don't intend to say much about this subject here, Madam Mayor, as I might have done, as we'll cover it in the notice of motion later. But it must be stressed, the expenditure on our statutory duties to provide temporary accommodation is not sustainable, and there is a significant risk that the council will not be able to balance future budgets unless sufficient targeted funding is received from the government. Addressing the HRA, the rent increase contained in the budget is 7.7%, which is inflation plus 1%. This is the amount that the government has identified as acceptable to raise rents by this year. The HRA balance is anticipated to be around £3 million at the end of the period, which is a healthy balance. Councillor Irvine may well wish to add to this later, but I wish to put on record my certainty for the amount our tenants pay. Despite all the challenges, they receive a first-class service from our dedicated Crawley Homes team with a repairs budget and maintenance programme that compares very favourably with any council or social housing provider. The capital strategy. This report also contains a capital strategy and a high-level overview of how capital expenditure, capital financing and treasury management activity contribute to the provision of the council services. While I believe this is a solid foundation, our capital strategy is something we will need to strengthen even further going forward, as funds get less and the need to prioritise capital spend and understand the revenue implications of the capital programme get more important. It will also need to be reviewed in terms of asset management planning and the increasing need to get best value out of our asset base. This will be ongoing, but I want to stress it will be done responsibly and at the right time. And while I don't rule out disposals, there will be no sales that don't reflect a proper market price. The overall aim will be to avoid borrowing as much as possible so as to minimise any interest payable. This is our budget for the forthcoming financial year, Madam Mayor, and while it will give us some certainty for that period, we are far from complacent in this Labour administration about what needs to be done in the future. We will leave no stone unturned, including a further review of earmarked reserves, with several reviews that will continue into the next financial year to ensure everything is identified. Importantly, though, everything we are doing is keeping us above the £3 million minimum balance in the Council's reserves that we are aiming to retain for the purposes of financial prudence.
2 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be drawing to a close quite soon, although I'm no doubt I will have the need to respond on points that are raised by members. It is a far from ideal situation for us here in Crawley, but it could be a good deal worse. And I think we're going to see that worst case scenario played out by quite a number of councils elsewhere over the country over the coming months. The challenge for us will be to make sure that we keep Crawley in the best position we possibly can. Thank you.
Councillor Nawaz, I believe you are seconding the recommendations and the clerical amendment. In doing so, please confirm if you are wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Nawaz.
Reserve the right to speak later.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan Crowe, Leader of the Opposition, you have 10 minutes to speak on the budget report, and in doing so, please also move your amendment to this recommendation, which is detailed on page 21 of the supplementary agenda. Please confirm if you want separate votes on each or on the amendment as a whole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can just about see you over there in the dark, and maybe we're saving on lighting already. I formally move my amendment, and yes, let's have 2 votes, please, for the 2 parts of it. I'd like to do that. I'll start by giving an honest and accurate assessment of the background to this year's budget. I'm in my 21st year here as a councillor, and I feel that I'm quite well versed in what's been going on in local government. There is no doubt local government faces financial pressures, and those pressures have grown significantly since we emerged from the COVID pandemic. There's also longer term trends such as demographic changes and the ageing population, as well as greater demand and complexity of cases within children's services. These primarily impact unitary authorities and upper tier authorities who've had some financial pressures for quite some years now. But what we're seeing now is a new pressure affecting local government, which is the cost of emergency and temporary accommodation. And that's something that's hitting lower tier authorities like ourselves. I won't dwell too much on housing, as we have a motion later tonight about housing in Crawley that I will be speaking on. But I will say this, that our housing problems here in Crawley have been 30-odd years in the making. I've lived in Crawley for each of the last 30 years, and I've seen the way how house prices and rents and demand for housing have changed and got progressively harder for people. You know, throughout this time, the affordability of housing, both in Crawley and nationally, has become progressively worse, and we've now reached a point where it is having a severe impact on our council budget. Your district and borough councils are starting to feel the difficulties that upper tier authorities have been having over recent years, albeit for different reasons. Now, we do need more funding to help address the costs of this council in providing the cost of temporary accommodation. And I'd be very happy to put my name to sensible lobbying efforts for the council to receive such funding. You know, there is some common cause with what the leader said there and from myself as well. But I do have to mention that when we came out of the COVID pandemic, and we've also had the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine, these 2 events have given us 2 years of global high inflation, the likes of which haven't been seen in decades. And one very obvious impact of that has been the pay settlements. Now, I absolutely do not begrudge for 1 minute having our staff having a pay rise because they face the same cost of living pressures that everybody else has. But we shouldn't shy away from the fact that for the last 2 years we've had local government pay settlements of a fixed amount of £1,925, I think it was, for all FTE employees. So when we think that everyone who's working for us has had the best part of a 4K pay rise over 2 years, we do have to understand that also has a major impact on our budget, as well as such things as not been able to develop the old town hall site, where we've seen quite a significant impact in not receiving revenue that we're expecting to have with our district heat network. Also, this year's budget will be sensitive to what this year's pay award will be. We assume a 3.5% pay increase, and I've no idea what will eventually get agreed in the national pay bargaining process, but I do expect that if the first offer is 3.5%, that Unison will be wanting more. And this council's sensitivity analysis shows that if the pay award was 1% higher, it would have a significant additional pressure on this year's budget and indeed future years' budgets. The pay rises of the last couple of years have averaged out in the region of over double what the council is legally able to set as its council tax rise without a referendum, which is 3%. And council tax funds roughly half of our net budget, and the legal restriction for the maximum increase for the last 2 years has not been able to match the inflation that we've had. So again, there is some common cause there that has put this council at a disadvantage with our finances. And there is a debate to be had at national level about how we fund local government. We know that costs have risen and will continue to rise, but when people talk about cost of funding, what we need to recognise is that the level of spendings is actually increasing, but not at the rate at which costs are increasing. But thankfully, we are seeing inflation come down, and the forecasts are back down to the long-term average this year, but it will be vulnerable to further increases again. The reality for all precepting authorities applies to us ourselves is that for the last few years their share of the council tax, we've all increased our council tax shares by the maximum amount. There hasn't been a level playing field in the ability to generate revenue. And we also have the absurdity that parish and town councils, it doesn't apply to Crawley, but elsewhere, don't have such a restriction. Some of those have been putting them up by ridiculous amounts. I've heard amounts of even up to 40%. So we do need to bring back some fairness nationally as to how much precepting authorities are able to propose in their council tax rises. And certainly Crawley has been at a disadvantage over recent years with that. Turning to the budget itself, I thank the finance team and all the officers for the work they've done on this year's budget. I did observe that the leader is quoted as saying in the council's press release about the budget that, and I quote, "The cabinet and senior officers have done a superb job to present a balanced budget." Now, I do have to say, when it comes to this council's cabinet, and I see how they perform, that the word superb is not exactly the first word beginning with the letter S that comes into my mind when I think about them. And clearly this budget is for the next financial year. I don't think it's an unreasonable comment to make that we could have grasped the letter just a little bit more in seeking to protect the provision of services for future years. What we do have is an element of backloading as opposed to front-loading when it comes to saving and efficiencies, and this could potentially have implications in future years. So we have this figure of £296,000, which is not an especially large amount when we are being told how dire the council's financial position is, something that I do recognise. And by not having a greater amount of savings this year, I think we could be putting greater pressure on next year's budget, and we would need a greater amount of, and we'd be losing a greater amount of interest revenue on our reserves by not making savings sooner. So we could be having additional pressures in future years. You know, we do want to help out the council's financial position for both this year and future years. And our amendments would do exactly that. Some slippage in the capital programme at this time would enable our reserves to be healthier and would generate additional funds for us. Not only that, the budget report states that borrowing to fund the future capital programme is a very real possibility, and doing so creates a further revenue budget pressure for us. So seeking to delay that surely makes some sense and further strengthens our financial position. But we're not trying to be too prescriptive with this amendment. It is intentionally flexible, both with the amount being sought to defer and, of course, what items to defer. And it may well be that some items will be likely to slip anyway. So let's try to actually preempt that in the first place. A year ago, doing this proposed amendment might have risked project costs increasing with inflation over the year, so the benefit would have been lessened. But now we are going to be at a stage for the year ahead where inflation will be lower, but the interest rates are still high, and we could be getting more interest on our reserves by having a great amount of reserves. It's the right time to benefit from this. And we also have another very small amendment, because I note for the second year running that the Labour administration are proposing to reduce the resource and staffing in our neighbourhood antisocial behaviour team, and I don't believe this aligns with the priorities and concerns of our residents. So we are proposing to remove this small saving and reinvest it back into the service in a way that officers best feel they can make the use to tackle antisocial behaviour. It's a very small draw on reserves, but it's compensated several times over by the additional last-minute government funding that we've been awarded to, hence the change in the amount that we're due to take from reserves to 1.2 to about just over 1 million. And of course, our amendment
2 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, I'm nearly done. Thank you. Our amendment to review the capital programme would also potentially have some slippage if adopted. Again, would decrease our income by several times the amount needed for our small saving, or not to make that small saving. The Conservative group do want this council to succeed, not just for this year, but for future years. And that applies to regardless of whoever forms administration and indeed who is in government. And if I happen to be presenting next year's budget as the council leader, I will be doing so with an eye on future years' budgets as well, not just on the upcoming year ahead. Our amendment today could help contribute towards that long-term goal. And I do say this in all sincerity, that I do hope the Labour group will vote for it, and that we can then all agree the budget. Thank you.
That's very good.
Councillor Lanza, I believe you are seconding the proposed budget amendment, and in doing so, please confirm if you are wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
No, I'd like to speak now, please, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks to Councillor Jones and the finance team for preparing and presenting this budget. I will first of all make a few comments about, in response to Councillor Jones. He says that we try and dazzle people with large sums of money, but the large sums of money, although they are capital, have important potential. The fact is, although we don't keep all of our business rates, not by any means, business rates are very important from the point of view of financing council services. And the £21 million or so from the government into the Towns Fund and the £60 million invested in the Crawley Growth Programme, although it's all capital, both of these resources have the potential to stimulate business activity and therefore improve business rates income. So they are actually relevant. Although the budget today refers to an increase in fees and charges of 7%, I do think there was a certain naivety in last year's budget in the level of fees and charges, and had that level been more realistic, then we could have been perhaps a little bit lower in the current year in the proposed budget. I take the point about temporary accommodation expenditure not being sustainable, and it would not be reasonable to say that this is the fault of any political administration, including the current one. Councillor Jones, in the housing context, remarks that tenants are receiving a first-class service, yet we have seen in reports an increased number of complaints, delays in terms of activity to support our tenants. And I wonder how much his remarks about us providing a first-class service for tenants are actually borne out by tenant feedback rather than his own assertion in tonight's debate. As Councillor Crowe mentioned, on the temporary accommodation point, housing, we're very ready to support lobbying of central government in the interests of Crawley overall. Turning to the amendment, we're not committing you to a particular adjustment to the capital programme in this amendment, but interest rates remain relatively high. We're just saying if you review it and can identify deferrals, not scrapping of projects, deferral of projects of between £2 million and £5 million. On today's rates, that would generate additional revenue of between £100,000 and £250,000 per annum, recurring, and it is a good time potentially to avoid borrowing in the future and to help with our reserves in future years. Referring to the second part of our amendment, it's worth £21,000, which in response to our remarks you might well describe as trivial, but the fact that it's a trivial amount in the grand scheme of things is all the more reason to vote for it, given its impact across Crawley. All the more reason to vote for it, especially as we've received an additional £137,000 from central government. We know in a later report being discussed this evening about the car parking public space protection order that there are increases in antisocial behaviour. So this is not the time, absolutely not the time, to reduce the resources available to the neighbourhood antisocial behaviour team. And you could send the right message by accepting our very small amendment. The savings proposed, just £296,000. You need to be more ambitious, and you need to think about extending the outsourcing that you already undertake. You already do it for K2 Crawley, you already do it for the Horth, for the Golf Centre. All of these organisations' activities notch up considerable successes for our residents. And I'd remind you and ask you to speculate on what would happen at tonight's budget meeting if you had been successful in blocking the outsourcing of the management of the Horth in 2012, saving £253,000 per annum in 2012 prices. I don't think you'd be setting a balanced budget this evening, or you'd have a lot more difficulty doing so. But instead, you just walked out of the council chamber. That was your contribution to that particular debate. So trouble is, historically, the Labour group here has had a fixation that they're almost the only employer in Crawley, when in the last year or so, job vacancies in Crawley and beyond have been at really, really high levels. And you should consider outsourcing. It's not a panacea, but you should look at it more openly as a possibility where it provides quality services and savings for residents. It's not the answer always, but you show a dogmatic reluctance to actually look at it at all. So I do hope that you will back our amendments. They are progressive, they help the council's revenue budget, they address public concerns, and I feel that my critique of your dogmatic attitudes is entirely fair.
I will now open up the debate to the floor. Councillor Irvine.
Press. First of all, can I just say, I don't know if Councillor Crowe was intending to insult the Cabinet, but if he was, I think it was a bit unnecessary. And I'm not going to go down the route of reciprocating in kind, because I actually like hearing what other councillors have to say, especially Conservatives, because it always convinces me that I'm right. But anyway, I've been prompted twice tonight to talk about housing, and I was going to do it anyway because, part of my portfolio brief is to look after the housing revenue account and make sure that it's fit for purpose and it's not running into deficit or whatever. So I'm very pleased to say that it is in good order. And while I'd like to congratulate myself on that, I don't think I can. I'd like to thank instead the head of Crawley Homes and all our staff for maintaining the housing revenue account while at the same time maintaining a good service to our tenants. And these are quite exciting times in a way for Crawley Homes, because we are pushing forward to modernise things. Well, I would say modernise. We're bringing in extra staff so we can conduct rolling stock condition surveys so that we know that all our council homes are up to scratch. We're bringing in new measures for tenants to participate, and so much more retrofitting and putting in devices to save water. So that I think the future for Crawley Homes is bright, but we mustn't take our eye off the ball. And on Councillor Lanz's point about, honestly, you always have to be so negative about, we will see what the tenants really think. Well, you'll find out soon, because there's a tenant satisfaction survey in process. But those of us who were at the Housing Association scrutiny panel the other week will have heard the representative from the Guinness Trust speaking very authoritatively about the massive level of increase of repairs in her organisation and across the Housing Association and social housing sector as a whole. So if there is a massive increase in repairs, it's not just down to us, it's just what has happened. And the whole sector has to grasp and grapple with that. So, when you're trying to make your points, don't just sort of take us in isolation. Look at the wider context. Do a bit of reading outside the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph. Get to grips with the world. You might enlighten yourself a bit.
Thank you. Councillor Belbin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought I was be coming in a bit later, actually. I pushed it a bit later, but never mind, I'll come in now. I know this debate is all about budget strategy, but as all accountants know full well, balance sheets are where creative accounting can be done and where things can be hidden. Now, I'm not saying we do that, but interestingly, on page 34 of the Treasury Management Report, there is a list of our investment properties. 3 of these properties have a market value significantly less than their purchase price. And that list does not include Telford Place or the District Heat Network, by the way. This total potential loss amounts to £3.15 million. The note then goes on to say security. In accordance with government guidance, the Council considers a property investment to be secure if its accounting valuation, fair value, is at or higher than its purchase cost, including taxes and transaction costs. A fair value assessment of the Council's investment property portfolio is undertaken annually with our audit. Where the fair value of an investment property is no longer sufficient to provide security against loss, the Council will consider mitigating actions to protect the capital invested. Interesting to know what actual plans the Cabinet have on this. The Create building has a market value of £2.4 million less than it cost us. I hope it starts to generate the income that Councillor Lamb predicted in so many emails to me when I queried the viability of building more office space when Crawley already had so much unlet. I also, by the way, queried the ability to let out these floors when the parking provision is below what a lot of big firms expect and require. So, as an accountant, I'm saying to you basically, yes, this is a budget and it's agreed, but you also have to look at your balance sheet. All firms are valued at on their balance sheets. Our audit concentrates on our balance sheet. So budgets and income and expenditure isn't the whole picture. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Mullins.
Thank you. I sometimes wonder whether reality is in some people's minds when they look at the state of this country today. And going on glibly about outsourcing, privatisation, Bob, the way you were, you'd want to wonder really whether you actually understand what's happened in this country, and if you understand at all that the private companies whose only interest and search is for profit and greed and not service, how they fail our people and how they're failing this country. I mean, do I have to say it? I probably do. Look at the energy crisis we're going through and the fact that ordinary people can no longer afford to heat their homes. Some struggle to even cook food. It's so bad now for so many people because these industries are privatised. Water. Look what's happened to water. And the state of our rivers, the state of our seas, which are unusable for recreation any longer because they would poison people. And that's how dangerous they are now. Look at housing, largely privatised. I wondered when you were suggesting outsourcing whether you'll start to think about housing for that. Well, the areas that have done housing outsourcing aren't working out too great, and the private market in housing is dreadful, and people cannot afford to survive in the private housing market. We privatised our airports, and our airports are a mess by and large. Air traffic control hasn't got enough staff to do the job properly. They're understaffed and they're in terrible condition trying to control our aircraft coming in and out of the country. And let's not forget the railways. What a mess railways are in. Privatised railways do not work, and everybody knows it. So we go on. I could go on a bit longer about things that have been privatised, but privatisation does not work because it completely forgets the element of service. And the whole of those industries are simply run for profit. And that profit is driven by greed. And the shareholders do very, very well indeed, but the people who receive the services from those companies do not do very well. And that's, I think I needed to answer that because, I know what you're leading up to, and I would like you to have actually said what it is you want to privatise, Bob, because you never said that.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will stand up because my leg needs to have a little bit of a stretch. Thank you. I think sometimes, Councillor Mullins, you sort of overlook the privatisation argument. We outsourced the Hort and we outsourced UK, but we're still responsible for the buildings. And may I say that the K2 building needs a lot of work doing on it. Now, you could call this budget a balanced budget, but it's not a fair one. It is failing, and I'm sure you can see this, our vulnerable residents and our tenants. Madam Mayor, the councillors of this administration, to quote someone I know, are not accountants. We've got an accountant. They are not accountants, they are councillors. And as councillors, they are, as we all know, the voice of the people. This budget, and I agree with my colleague there, hides many things. It hides increase in rents, increase in building maintenance, increase in ground maintenance, increase in freehold payments, increase in shared ownership payments, and of course, as we all will experience, an increase in the council tax. Just how much pressure can our tenants take? We already have a high affordable rent set at 80% market rent, whatever market rent is, yet you've failed to keep your overspends in check. Overspent on this town hall, overspent on the heating district network, overspent on the fountain debacle. I could go on. You failed to listen to this side of the chamber when we question the finances involved in building this cold place, question the finance needed, question the choice of developer who has now left us to cope with the demolition, of the old town hall. Another overspend. Question the choice of gas for the heating district system. Question the idea of replacing the old town hall as it was felt part of our heritage, and that doing so would rip the heart out of Crawley, which it has. You can laugh as much as you like, but these are things that are fact. We even question building flats in its place once it's removed. No longer a possibility because of the vicinities near buildings. What a pity that was not thought of before everything began. Did not check with planning first. Do you know you were just hell-bent on vanity projects with no forward thinking of how such expenditure will impact the town or the residents, especially our tenants and those on low income. If this is your best, then it's not good enough. I'm not blaming our officers as they work to what you want. It's the councillors who run the town. I cannot support the budget as it stands. Thank you. But I support our amendment. Thank you. Nobody else?
Councillor Sue Mullins.
I'm not going to stand up because my leg won't let me stand up. Okay, just a couple of things. First of all, I want to take issue with Mr. Councillor Crowe. If you're going to refer to the cabinet opposite with using initial letters and followed by asterisks, I don't find that very clever or very funny. If my small child does things like that, I offer to wash his mouth out with soap. So maybe your mum should have been a little bit stricter when you were younger. Either that or use the words that you want to use so it's clear what you're meaning. Otherwise, people take the wrong idea, don't they? You glibly talk about savings. Glib is a word that's already been used today, but I think it needs using again, because glib is exactly the way you say it. You speak about savings. When we talk about savings, we're talking about cuts. If you're going to talk about savings stroke cuts, would you please like to enumerate exactly where you would like to make those cuts and those savings? You talk about delaying some of our projects into the future to save money for now. If you delay a capital project, it becomes more expensive. We've just seen that over this past year when inflation was roaring away at 11%. That means that every single thing that you try to do costs 11% more. And that's building materials, that's workforce, that's everything. So by delaying whatever capital projects you wish to push into the future means that those capital projects may well become unaffordable and therefore undeliverable in the future. If talking about outsourcing, you talk about outsourcing the Horth and K2 and what a fantastic success it's been. Yes, it's staggered along, but look what happened during COVID. It cost both the Horth and K2, cost this council enormous amounts of money because we were contractually obliged to reimburse them for their lost profits. If we'd owned the Horth and still had control of the Horth and still had control of K2, that would not have happened. We would have had control of those buildings. We'd have known which parts to keep open, which staff to keep in place, and we would not have lost the amount of money that we had to give away to private companies. Think before you speak, please.
Thank you. There are no further speakers. Councillor Narwaz, do you wish to come in?
Oh, Chair, if we let Councillor Ali, let Councillor Ali speak then.
Oh, Councillor Ali, sorry. And then I'll bring you in, Councillor Narwaz.
Work proper. I mean, this mic's button doesn't work properly, but it's working now. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I begin by thanking officers for their effort in what have been a difficult budget process. Tonight, and in fact, every night and day, we must focus on the needs of Crawley residents. This is our chance to demonstrate we care about our residents and the financial pressure Crawley residents face. Madam Mayor, I suspected even before start of tonight's meeting, we'll hear from Labour councillors speak tonight and claim that the financial position of the council is all the fault of the government. I accept that the DSG settlement need to be addressed, but the Labour administration cannot just run from its decisions. They have been the administration for 42 years out of last 50 years. They have made political decisions that have had a direct effect on the financial position of this council. Labour decisions taking at a time of calm, which now means that our residents are facing poor services in Crawley. We don't need to go very far. If we just go across the road from this shiny multi-million-pound building and we look at the state of public toilets, just visible from this window, they are in derelict state sometimes. They are in disgusting and unsafe state. I have heard and listened from residents, especially female toilet. Ladies have to go home to use the toilet and come back again. And we talk about increasing footfall in town centre. We talk about supporting our local businesses in town centre. But even if we can't provide a public toilet facility, how we encourage people to do that? If we go a few yards further down the road, is our town centre. Despite millions of pounds of funding from government, look at the state of our town centre. This administration has spent a large sum of people's money on many features, vanity projects, for example, fountains in town centre. Just this year alone, we have spent £175,000 to get some work done, so they might work or they may work in coming summer. How residents have any confidence? How can residents have any confidence that this Labour-led council listen to people, can deliver a better Crawley? As shown in our order paper, we have submitted an amendment. This amendment saying that £21,000, which according to Councillor Sue Millen, is a cut to our neighbourhood anti-social behaviour team. Madam Mayor, I would say this administration lacks strong leadership and vision. We have a council leader who barely has the support of all of the Labour group. He had to create, you'll get your chance, Councillor Ayling, to speak. The meeting is being chaired by Madam Mayor, and I think she'll decide when you need to speak. He had to create additional cabinet posts and offer committee chairs to keep the group under control. Councillor Mullen asked where cut should be, I would say cut that additional cabinet position and make some savings over there, especially when half of the time leader have to answer questions from public, leader have to answer questions from this side of the chamber on behalf of those cabinet members sitting over there. So here is one saving for you, and where you can show that you care about people and you listen to the people of Crawley. This is not the leadership Crawley residents deserve. This Labour administration, in polite words, is careless, incompetent, and arrogant.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you very much. Well, so to use my usual opening phrase, I hadn't intended to speak tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, circumstances have required a response to be given to some of the charges that have been made. My name has certainly been brought up in vain a number of occasions, and despite what members against on the opposite side may well have desired, I'm actually not going to give in and spend a load of time digging through ancient history, frankly, for an awful lot of this. Let's cut to the chase of what's actually going on. Yes, the Labour Party has been in control of Crawley Borough Council for most of its history as a borough, and in that time we have delivered services that residents have regularly viewed as being outstanding in comparison with most of the neighbouring authorities. And the way we did that was that we worked very hard to generate significant income and to make significant financial decisions that would ensure we were able to pay for services well and above what our neighbours are in receipt of. And certainly you don't have to go very far to compare those services to see, even today, that this council has continued to provide services above and beyond. What we have had over the last 14 years, however, has been the biggest reduction in local government funding in the history of the United Kingdom. Now, anyone who believes that you can lose over half of your council's budget for services and continue to function at the same level, I would argue is deluded. Actually, we can go further back than that and look to when the Tories took control of the council in 2007, 2006, the last budget the Labour Party had put in place was 6-7. We were operating on a third of the budget in real terms that we had at that point in time. The reality is that no council can deliver the same services on a third of the budget for services. It is completely unrealistic. And members may well want to point the finger at members on this side of the chamber and say we're responsible for making savings. Well, we have had to make savings here and there. Actually, for most of the time we've been in, we managed to deliver them without any frontline savings whatsoever. We managed to deliver budget after budget that was balanced, that even put money into reserves, which the members opposite often criticise us for, and now we're making use of those reserves, the exact purpose that they were put aside for. on the basis of making sound financial investment decisions that manage to generate income at time to keep us going. Where we are now, however, is an economy that is in the toilet, thanks to the members opposite, providing us no opportunity to try and make up the difference in the way that we have previously. And the lack of apology, you know, we talked about arrogance, council leaders, the arrogance to belong to a party and to go out and actually campaign for that party year in, year out, to put that party into office, knowing that they intend to cut the council's budget, knowing that they're no good at running the economy, and creating the circumstances where residents out there are desperately struggling in their own lives, never mind when it comes to council services, and to come in here and to try and accuse us of misspending money when we've managed to scrape every penny to try and put it back into people's pockets is quite astounding. Now, they've reeled off a list of projects, and they're going to probably keep trying to use the word vanity projects over the next... I think that someone somewhere has gone away and done some groupthink and decided this is the term we're going to hit them with. What they, of course, ignored is that every one of those vanity projects had a recorded vote attached to it, and the members opposite voted for those projects. So don't try changing history now. We've got you. The reality, ladies and gentlemen, is what this council needs, more than this budget, more than any sort of kind words or hostile words from the opposition, is a Labour government. And I'm so glad to have the agreement of Councillor Crowe on that point. It is the one thing that is historically proven to get the money back into council services, whether it's at Crawley Borough Council or West Sussex County Council. And if you want to talk about services being run down, I say go out there and look at the state of our roads, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to see what we're getting in our inboxes as councillors day in, day out, that is how we're going to deliver change as a country. It's by getting a change of government, and that's ultimately in the best interest of every member of this chamber. Thank you.
Councillor Lunnan.
Thank you. I also hadn't intended to speak tonight, and I won't make a very, very long contribution, but I just want to challenge a couple of points that Councillor Ali had made, and I don't think it would be fair for them to go, and it might be that Councillor Jones was also going to counter them, but I just didn't think it was fair to let them go without making a comment on them. The state of the town centre when the Labour administration took control in 2014 was not good. Let's be clear about that. The works that have happened in Queen Square have improved the public realm, and actually, if you go around Queen Square now in the summer when it's warm enough, you'll see plenty of people sitting outside enjoying coffee, sort of having the European style culture that many towns would love to see in their town centre, instead have run down and empty shops surrounding their town centre. So I think it's quite, well, I just think it's plain wrong. When Labour took control in 2014, the plans for the town centre still involved on, I think it was Town Centre West it was called, and it was still hoping that John Lewis would turn up in Crawley despite having opened a store in Horsham. It was beyond the realms of believability, and it still hadn't been corrected. And it was thanks to the leadership of this council, provided by Councillor Lamb and at the time Councillor Smith, that actually refocused us on working with what we did have and delivering a town centre that is much better. Some people might say vanity projects, but actually I think it's about having a bit of civic pride in the state of the town centre and making it look good. And it's the same, across the town where money has been invested. And also, I'll just mention two words that I think shows that maybe this Labour administration has looked after public money better than the Conservative administration. That's Maidenbower Pavilion. That was shown to be a basket case of a local project, but run by the Conservative administration. And I don't think it's fair for us to be accused of bad administration when that is what the Conservatives managed to achieve. So I'll leave it there, but I just think it's completely wrong to say that we have not improved the state of the town centre, and I think it's doing a lot better than it would have been if the Conservatives had been trying to get John Lewis in down the road.
Councillor Narwas, do you wish to speak now? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think there's quite interesting debates and points has been raised, and I thank Councillor Lennon to mention the public realms in town centre, the great work been done by Labour administration over the years, and now we have a regenerated town, and which is quite transformative, and we have some other projects on the way to even improve it better. But I just want to reply on a couple of points. One of the points Councillor Burgess raised about the district heat network. So actually, district heat network overspend is predominantly because we aren't getting the connection fees for the utilities for the old town hall. because former developer is now taking it further to develop the site. This fee we have lost is almost as much as we are overspent by. So it's not really we overspend, it's that the connection fee we're not getting. Gas prices are quite high, and shielding tenants from the full effect has also had a cost, although this should have been addressed with the rise in tariffs made last November. So it will improve over time. And second point, I think Councillor Ali mentioned about, he's complaining about the toilets. I think, did he actually, I haven't heard any complaint from Councillor Ali if there is any issue with the toilets or something. So, you know, if you let us know, so if you, yeah, if you let us know, we could have, you know what it is, but we haven't heard anything from you if there is any problem with that. Thank you very much, Madam, on those points. Thank you.
There are no further speakers. Councillor Jones, do you wish to use your right to reply, and in doing so, please formally move the recommendations?
Yes, I thought I might have to, Madam Mayor. Councillor Crowe, I do feel there were some fairly desperate excuses as to why the financial issues at this council are other people's fault other than the government's. With inflation, the rates they've been, it's understandable our employees have expected rises that reflect the pressure on them. Of course it is. And I listened quite carefully tonight, and a lot of I heard, all he had was to insult my cabinet, and Councillor Lanza wanted to mention something that happened 12 years ago. I mean, seriously, is that all you've got? I mean, there's been some remarks here about how we'd have done this so much better from them, but actually, you know, they've had plenty of opportunities to put forward formal savings. You know, and where are they? All I see is an item to add to our spending today, not reduce it. And you know, they say that we've not gone far enough. I wish they'd be a bit more honest, and we have been, because the next step is to cut frontline services. There are no rabbits to pull out of the hat anymore. That is the reality for our residents. Now, I will give Councillor Crowe some credit. Even he couldn't say being leader of this council next year without a laugh in his voice, and you know, I'm not sure he'll even be the leader of his group personally, but we'll have to see. I'm a little puzzled about the amendments, if I'm honest, Madam Mayor, because the budget strategy was agreed by full council, and I thought we had agreement. I mean, I was baffled, if I'm honest, about Councillor Burgess's comments. I mean, how is any of what we've put forward tonight hiding it? It's in the papers. I've mentioned it directly. You said it's wrong. Where are the amendments to put it right? I really don't understand. It just seems a little demonstrative. It's very. Councillor Belbin's mentioned some of the income from the town hall, and I would like to address that. It is very frustrating for me, knowing what I do about the current state of play for new tenants moving into the town hall. Far from being a burden soon, it is my view that the building of this town hall will be one of the things that provides a healthy source of revenue for this council. I had genuine, very realistic hopes that I'd be able to join Councillor Khan and Councillor Noyce today with announcements on lease signings for some of our floors. Unfortunately, that's not proved possible, but we are likely only days away from being able to do so. Things are so far advanced, so watch this space. I've possibly trampled over a few things the officers would rather I hadn't said, so apologies in advance if that's the case. I will address the amendments with the seriousness they deserve. I said earlier when discussing the capital programme, we're not going to be constrained by targets on the capital programme. We'll do what's right. And I have recognised the desirability of making savings. This is an unnecessary amendment, and had I done it to Councillor Lanza in his different role, I think he would have rejected it as well. There will in reality be capital slippage without his needing to call for it. The second amendment, I could barely believe when I saw it. It's blatant electioneering for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. At no point can I recall, despite an extensive scrutiny and seminar process, anyone saying to myself or the Cabinet that this ASB team member was needed from the Conservative group. So to get this amendment with barely 2 hours' notice is not going to happen. I mean, in previous discussions I've had with the head of service, last time I spoke to her, she seemed to indicate that the team was performing at satisfactory levels. It is in any effect a long-term vacancy. I may have considered this amendment if the Conservative group's government had given us more money, but sadly we're not in that position. Now, Councillor Crowe, Councillor Lanza, Councillor Ali, they're all up for lobbying, but from what I've heard tonight, none of it's the government, lobbying the government, I mean, but none of it is apparently the government's fault. And that seems a bit contradictory to me. If I can finish my observations and move, Madam Mayor, with this. The level of denial to the government's failure to properly fund local councils from the Conservative group tonight's off the scale. And it reminds me of that scale of denial that's beautifully encapsulated, run with me here, everyone, by an internet meme. So I'm down with these things, which certainly many of the public and councillors will have seen, of the cartoon dog who's sitting in a room where everything's on fire and is in advanced state of conflagration, while the dog sits there watching all of this saying, this is fine, you know. Madam Mayor, the burning building in this case is local government finance, and I could say that the dog is one of the councillors opposite, but I'll say the dog is Michael Gove. There we are. Thank you. I'll finish there.
Councillor Jones, can you please move the recommendation?
With the clerical
With the clerical
amendment.
amendments.
Madam Mayor, I thought I had moved, but I will move it with the clerical amendment. Thank you.
We are now on to the voting of the amendment and the recommendation on the 2024-25 budget and council tax. As these are going to be done via recorded votes, I'm going to invite the Head of Governance, People and Performance to conduct both votes. Siraj.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just for clarification purposes, this is a recorded vote. There'll be 2 recorded votes on the 2 different elements of Councillor Crowe's amendment, which is detailed on page 21 of the order paper. So the first recorded vote will be on the first element of Councillor Crowe's Conservative amendment relating to a proposed review of the capital programme. I will read out the councillor names. Please don't wait for your microphones and just state for, against or abstained. Thank you. Councillor Ali. Councillor Ashraf. Councillor Ayling. Councillor Belbin. Councillor Bounds. Councillor Burgess. Councillor Burke. Councillor Chariton. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Hart.
Against.
Councillor Hellier. Councillor Irvine. Councillor Jaggard. Councillor Jahans. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kiran Khan.
I'm voting against.
Councillor Yasmin Khan. Councillor Lamb. Councillor Lanza. Councillor Lunnan. Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Miller-Smith. Councillor Morris. Councillor Chris Mullins. Councillor Sue Mullins. Councillor Magali. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Noyce. Councillor Pendleton. Councillor Piggott. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Raja. Councillor Rana. Councillor Russell. Thank you. Okay, so for was 15 and against was 19. that right? Other way around, sorry. No. Against is 19. Yes,
Yeah,
against is 19, yes. And for is 15. So that element of Councillor Crow's amendment that hasn't been carried. That falls. So we move to the second element of Councillor Crow's amendment, which relates to the savings on the NASB team. So again, I'll read out the names. Councillor Ali, Councillor Ashraf, Councillor Ayling, Councillor Belbin, Councillor Bounds, Councillor Burgess, Councillor Burke, Councillor Chariton, Councillor Crowe, Councillor Hart,
Against.
Councillor Hellier, Councillor Irvine, Councillor Jaggard, Councillor Jahans, Councillor Jones, Councillor Kiran Khan, Councillor Yasmin Khan, Councillor Lamb, Councillor Lanza, Councillor Lunnan, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Miller-Smith, Councillor Morris, Councillor Chris Mullins, Councillor Sue Mullins, Councillor Magali, Councillor Nawaz, Councillor Noyce, Councillor Pennington, Councillor Piggott, Councillor Pritchard, Councillor Raja, Councillor Rana, Councillor Russell. Thank you. So same. So for that element, it's 15 and against is 19. So again, that element, the second element of Councillor Crow's amendment falls, so not carried. So we now move on to the recorded vote on the substantive recommendation 1, 2024-25 budget and council tax, including the clerical labour amendment. So again, so this is on the substantive motion. I'll read the names of the councillors. Councillor Ali. Abstain. Councillor Ashraf. For. Councillor Ayling. For. Councillor Belbin. Abstain. Councillor Bounds. Abstain. Councillor Burgess. Abstain. Councillor Burke. Abstain. Councillor Chariton. For. Councillor Crowe. Abstain. Councillor Hart. For. Councillor Hellier. Councillor Irvine. Councillor Jaggard. Councillor Jahans. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kiran Khan. Councillor Yasmin Khan. Councillor Lamb. Councillor Lanza. Councillor Lunnan. Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Miller-Smith. Councillor Morris. Councillor Chris Mullins. Councillor Sue Mullins, Councillor Magali, Councillor Nawaz, Councillor Noyce, Councillor Pennington, Councillor Piggott, Councillor Pritchard, Councillor Raja, Councillor Rana, Councillor Russell. Thank you. Same. Okay. So for the recommendation, we have 19 votes and we have 15 abstentions, none against. So the recommendation is carried.
We will now consider recommendation 2, Treasury Management Strategy 2024-2025, starting on page 93. Councillor Jones, please introduce this recommendation from Cabinet.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Council is required to have a Treasury Management Strategy approved for the year ahead, as members will know. It broadly follows that was approved last year, the current strategy. It underpins the council's management of its cash, investments and borrowing to ensure cash flows adequately planned and available when needed. It is based around spending plans and capital programme in the budget report and forecast spend at this time. There are a range of prudential indicators around that based on spending plans and how they'll be financed. The council's external debt referred to in the report is the HRA self-financing loan. Repayment started back in 22-23. The policy includes the minimum revenue provision policy statement, which documents how the council will prudently pay down its debt each year. It also sets the limits of cash investments, who we can invest in and up to what level to keep our cash safe, based on the principles of security, liquidity and yield. They are the primary considerations before we apply any other ones. Most of the council's investments, as members will have noticed, are with other local authorities, most who have their own climate emergency declarations. The council's bank account is with Lloyds, who follow the UN principles for responsible banking, and the Net Zero Bank Alliance. The strategy states will prioritise banks who follow these two principles. Members will note that our counterparty limit with local authorities is being increased to £15 million from 10. Local authorities continue, we believe, to offer the best deals. We raise this to give us scope should a really good investment come up. It's a limit we might not necessarily go up to, but we would follow the normal investment procedure for keeping our money safe, so it is still considered prudent. Addressing interest rates, compared to the prospects for interest rates projected for next year by our Treasury advisors Arling Close, we're projecting a better yield due to a few old low interest deals maturing and 8 new deals locked in at interest rates ranging from 5.25% to 5.75%, which for perhaps some of our eagle-eyed opposition members over there will notice that this is a slight increase on the original report, which is very welcome news. It's certainly good that we've locked in such good interest rates on forthcoming local authority loans, but we do have to be realistic that such rates, nice as they are at the moment, are likely to gradually go down. But as we have a number of good rates locked in, we may not see the impact of this for some time. With respect to our commercial investments, investment properties, regulatory and professional guidance is that commercial activity should be proportionate with other activity. The biggest investment the council has is the Crate building. I am satisfied, I've spoken to our finance officers, that this overall portfolio is proportionate, but like with many other things at the moment, it will be kept under review. And many things would be more ideal if the benefit of hindsight was available when the decisions were originally taken. There's no debt associated with our investment properties, which reduces the risk to this council quite considerably in that regard. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move.
Thank you. Councillor Narwas, I believe you are seconding the recommendation, and in doing so, please confirm if you are wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
Yeah, I second that and reserve the right to speak later. Thank you.
I will now open the debate up to the floor. Anybody? No? Okay. As there are no speakers, Councillor Jones, do you wish to use your right? Councillor Narwas, I apologise. No? Okay. Councillor Jones, can you please formally move the recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally move.
I call for a vote on recommendation 2 as set out on page 93 of the order paper. Is that agreed, or would you like a vote on it? Thank you. We will consider recommendation 3, review of Crawley Borough Council statement of licensing policy for 2024-2029, detailed on page 94. Councillor Jones, please introduce this recommendation from Cabinet.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally move this recommendation. There have been many opportunities for members to scrutinise this policy already, including at the Licensing Committee, the Overview and Scrutiny Commission and Cabinet before tonight. I'm personally very pleased that as part of our policy, we will become one of the leading authorities in our licensing policy for fighting modern slavery, but I'll leave it to Councillor Yasmin Khan to say more if she wants when she seconds the recommendation later.
Thank you. Councillor Yasmin Khan, I believe you are seconding the recommendation, and in doing so, please confirm if you are wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
Later. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Mayor.
you. I will now open up the debate to the floor.
Councillor Burgess.
Councillor Burgess.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to take this opportunity of thanking the officers for their hard work in working on this. It's been a big undertaking, so thank you.
Any other no? As there are no further speakers, Councillor Yasmin Khan, do you wish to speak now?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, this report outlines the recommendations to adopt provisions, proposed revisions to the statements of licensing policy for the period 2024 to 2029. The Council, in its role as the licensing authority for the Borough of Crawley under the Licensing Act 2003, is required to publish and keep under review a statement of licensing policy. The statement of licensing policy sets out the way in which the Council as licensing authority deals with applicants made under the Act, enforcement, and how the Council will work with partner agencies to ensure the licensing objectives under the Licensing Act 2003 are promoted and upheld, namely the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, the protection of children from harm. The report encloses the Council's draft statement of licensing policy for the period 2024 to 2029, which has been consulted upon and feedback incorporated. The consultation found there to be broad support from the changes both from the public and from partner agencies such as the Sussex Police. The feedback obtained from the consultation and from the licensing committee is contained within the report, which outlined broad support for the revised policy. It is important to note that the proposed statement of the licensing policy 2024 to 2029 is significantly different from the current statement of policy covering the period 2019 to 2024 and has been rewritten to reflect this. This is due to the significant changes in the licensing landscape over the past 5 years, particularly as the result of COVID-19 pandemic, alongside new obligations placed on the licensing service, alongside changes to legislation, compliance requirements and regulatory practice. Appendix F outlines the changes made to the policy and provides a summary of the reason for those changes or where new sections have been added to the policy. There has been significant changes and additions in relation to public safety, public nuisance, crime and disorder and safeguarding, which strengthens our current commitment to promote and enforce the licensing objectives to make licensed premises and licensed activities safer for the public. This report was presented at Overview and Scrutiny Committee on 29th of January 2024, and the Commission moved to endorse the recommendations within the report. The report was also presented to Cabinet on 31st of January 2024. Council is asked to consider the recommendations within the report and to make any comments, if any, it wishes to and or to agree to make this public space protection order. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Jones, do you wish to use your right to reply? And in doing so, please formally move the recommendation.
I'll just formally move, Madam Chair.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We will consider recommendation 4, PSPO council-owned multi-storey car parks, detailed on page 95. Councillor Jones, please introduce this recommendation from Cabinet.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As members will know, this is proceeding with the work we agreed to do to make several of our town centre multi-storey car parks safer. The consultation's shown broad support, and a sufficient proportion of our users have told us quite clear that they've seen behaviour that would warrant a PSPO being enforced. Before I finish, I'm sure Councillor Noyce will have some very relevant things to say. I just want to say one thing. This decision isn't about undermining anyone's civil liberties. If you aren't going in or out of a car park for the legitimate reasons of coming to or going from your car, then you simply have no business being there in the first place. So in my view, it is absolutely right that we're seeking to protect users in this way. Thank you.
Councillor Noyce, I believe you're seconding the recommendation, and in doing so, please confirm if you are wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
Yes, I am seconding the recommendation, Madam Mayor, and I'll reserve my right as well. Thank you.
I will now open up the debate to the floor. Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We on this side support this public space protection order. There have been a number of PSPOs introduced in recent times, and I think this one is one of the most clear-cut in terms of the public feedback that we received. And of course, we're grateful for the passage of the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act of 2014 by the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition government, which made PSPOs possible in the first place. And of course, this applies to the council-owned car parks in Orchard Street, the Town Hall car park, and the Kingsgate multi-storey car park. They're all multi-storey car parks, in fact. And Councillor Jones is right that we need to react to this public feedback and improve their actual feelings of safety and well-being when using our car parks, and deter the kind of antisocial behaviour which our residents have reported to us. Thank you.
Councillor Burgess.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I must agree with my colleague that I too am really pleased about this public space protection order that's been granted for our council car parks following a consultation. As we know, it can attract antisocial behaviour if not protected, and criminal activity, and can feel quite unsafe when you're on your own in such car parks. It's nice to know that there's extra proceedings to protect people who are using the car parks. So I'd like to, so as a shadow cabinet member for public protection, I'm pleased this PSPO will be in place in the various car parks. It'll empower both the police and the public protection team, to whom I send my heartfelt thanks.
Okay. Councillor Noyce, do you wish to come in now?
Yes, very simply. I'd like to thank everybody for their comments, which I agree with, and I think this is a very useful PSPO to make these places safer and give us a useful redress in case there is any negative behaviour. Thank you.
There are no further speakers. Councillor Jones, do you wish to use your right to reply, and in doing so, please formally move the recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, just to thank members for their support. I formally move.
Is that agreed, or would you like a vote? Agreed. Thank you. We will now consider the notice of Precept 2024-2025, recommendation 5. This is included on page 13 in the supplementary agenda. Councillor Jones, please introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In recent years, Crawley has experienced a perfect storm in relation to temporary accommodation. We've seen huge increases in homelessness demand on the back of the national housing crisis, the lack of housing supply, and the costs of both ownership and rental. My main focus today is about funding, but I want to set out the human costs we're seeing. The local government system in this country wasn't built for the volumes of homelessness that we're seeing now. It is a far cry from the original vision for our new towns. And I would say some people will need to clarify their perceptions of who the councillor's having to step in with temporary accommodation for. For the most part, these aren't rough sleepers or migrants. That's a popular misconception. These are friends, families, family members, neighbours you know, even if you don't realise it. People are being evicted from their homes by bailiffs because either they can't afford the rents or their landlords can no longer afford their mortgages and are needing to sell, sending them with nowhere else to go. A roof is over the people's heads. Oh, I thought you said the note. I do especially. Oh, okay. I'm afraid. Well, I think when I heard notice, I do apologise to members. We'll come back. We'll come back to that. Well, the Precept, Madam Mayor, I think it's that annual occasion, members, where we've already voted on the bit that we have any influence over. The rest of it's been decided by other public authorities, which we apparently get a vote to note on. But I've always been intrigued by the academic possibilities of what would happen if we voted it down, because there's nothing I think we could do to change those precepts that have been set other than delay everything. I don't recommend we do that, members. I just formally move because I think it's a very straightforward thing that we just have to do as part of our statutory duties. Thank you.
Here we go. Councillor Nawaz, I believe you're seconding the notice of Precept.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members present wanting to speak on the recommendation, or are members happy to go straight to the vote? Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, of course, we will be supporting the notice of Precept. And I know Councillor Jones can sometimes go off on tangents, but we really thought it was quite odd, where I wasn't quite sure whether he was speaking to this one, but as time went on, it was clear that he was on the wrong item. Yes, we will be supporting this item, as we always do. It's a bit of a weird formality that this actually comes to us to approve. You know, it would just be ridiculous that we couldn't support it. So yes, we don't need to move to a vote. I think we can just agree it, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
We will now move to the voting on approving the notice of Precept. As this relates to setting the council tax, a recorded vote in line with legislation is required. After Councillor Jones, please move the adoption of recommendation 5, notice of Precept 2024-2025, and in so doing, you can use your right to reply.
I formally move.
Thank you. Will the Head of Governance, People and Performance please conduct the recorded vote?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We will now hold the recorded vote on recommendation 5, notice of Precept for 2024-25, as detailed on page 13 of the supplementary agenda. Again, I'll read the councillor names. Please answer for, against or abstain. Councillor Ali. Councillor Ashraf. Councillor Ayling. Councillor Belbin. Councillor Bounds. Councillor Burgess. Councillor Burke. Councillor Chariton. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Hart. Councillor Hellier. Councillor Irvine. Councillor Jaggard. Councillor Jahans. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kiran Khan. Councillor Yasmin Khan. Councillor Lamb. Councillor Lanza. Councillor Lunnan. Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Miller-Smith. Councillor Morris. Councillor Chris Mullins. Councillor Sue Mullins. Councillor Magali. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Noyce. Councillor Peck. Sorry, absent. Councillor Pendington. Councillor Piggott. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Raja. Councillor Rana. Councillor Russell. Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair. And carried.
That's unanimous and carried. We will now deal with the notice of motion before us this evening, which is set out on page 101 of the agenda. Notice of motion 1, declaring a housing emergency. This motion will be moved by Councillor Jones and seconded by Councillor Irvine. I therefore call upon Councillor Jones to formally move the motion and present the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll start again. In recent years, Crawley has experienced a perfect storm in relation to temporary accommodation. We've seen huge increases in homelessness demand on the back of the national crisis, the lack of housing supply and the costs of both ownership and rental. Now, my main focus today is about funding, but I want to first set out the human costs we're seeing. The local government system in this country wasn't built for the volumes of homelessness that we're seeing now. It's a far cry from the original vision for our new towns. And I would say some people will need to clarify their perceptions of who councillors having to step in with temporary accommodation for. These are people's friends, family members, neighbours you know, even if you don't realise it. People are being evicted and they're coming to the town hall because they've got nowhere else to go. A roof over people's heads is a basic human need, and it is a tragedy it is happening on this scale. A recent shelter study showed homelessness levels in Crawley to be the third highest in the South East at 1 in every 111 people. The council is actively working with over 750 households to prevent them entering temporary accommodation. But despite this significant preventative work, 494 households and 1,219 people were in temporary accommodation, a staggering figure. Of these, 288 were in nightly paid accommodation, with 96 placed out of the borough because of a lack of local supply. In December of last year, there were nearly 2,400 households on the council's housing register, which is up from just over 1,300 5 years ago, with 11 applicants per property. This is only likely to continue to increase. And of those 2,400, nearly 900 were in priority bandings. This is not about management of related services. Our related housing services are well regarded, and some of our work is cited by DLUC as best practice. We have a recent council and social housing building record for our size that would be the envy of most other councils. This is a local manifestation of a national housing crisis. We ourselves are constantly looking to improve what we do, but the reality is this is all working at the margins. I look back 5 years and temporary accommodation, Madam Mayor, was not a major issue for Crawley. Our net cost was just over £250,000. This year we're looking at a net cost of over £5 million. That's nearly a 20-fold increase. That's equivalent to over a third of our net revenue budget. And it's this acceleration of the issue that's so concerning, because last year the net cost of temporary accommodation increased by £2 million. Our projected increase for this financial year is similar. Looking forward, these prospects are no better. For instance, the Home Office decision to disperse directly from asylum contingency accommodation into communities, while currently low, is driving new demand. Crawley perhaps has become an asylum dispersal city by the back door. Currently, 3 out of our 4 asylum contingency hotels are due to remain open, meaning that dispersal will be recurring. Further, 2 of these 3 hotels will be used more intensively moving forwards. If the £2 million increase per year trend continues due to all of these combined pressures, in 18 months' time, our net costs for temporary accommodation will exceed 50% of our net revenue budget. This is simply not sustainable. The system is broken. The single easiest support would be for government to unfreeze the level at which housing benefit subsidy is set. In the past 5 years, the contribution of the housing benefit subsidy has reduced from 42% of our temporary accommodation costs in terms of what it covers to just 25%. We estimate that unfreezing it would have reduced our increase in net temporary accommodation costs, and our best estimate is between 800,000 and £1 million. This doesn't solve the problem, members, but it does buy valuable time. There's a moral imperative here too. Can anyone tell me of a government funding regime that is frozen at 2011 levels? That is now 13 years ago and a completely different era. It is simply unjust and it needs rectifying now. This crisis in Thank you, Madam Mayor. This crisis in temporary accommodation is a challenge that would be insurmountable even for the most well-resourced local authorities at the best of times. But we are quickly approaching the point this will inevitably impact on local council services for everyone. A statutory minimum provision of local services, assuming that is even affordable when everything else has been stripped away, is a bleak outlook. That future is not yet here, but it is coming unless the government does what is needed. It is for this reason I urge this council to declare a housing emergency.
Councillor Irvine, please second the motion and confirm if you are wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
I second the motion and I'd like to speak later.
Okay, thank you. We have an amendment to the notice of motion. This is detailed on page 23 of the supplementary agenda. Councillor Crowe, please introduce your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Formally move my amendment, noting that it simply adds more information and doesn't remove anything from the existing motion. There is no doubt that we have a problem with housing supply and the lack of affordability that comes with that lack of supply to meet the demand that we have. Although personally, I think crisis might be a better definition than emergency. I actually sort of had to look up the definition of emergency, and it says, and I quote, a serious, unexpected and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. So an example of an emergency could be, for example, if after I listened to one of Councillor Jones's speeches that I was to collapse and stop breathing, I would hope that members would regard that as an emergency and come to my aid as best they could. In July 2019, this council declared a climate emergency, and we'll soon be 5 years of being into that emergency. And given that carbon emissions continues to rise globally, especially from other countries abroad, and global warming will continue, this is a declared emergency for this council that will probably never be over in the lifetimes of all of us here. And it is pertinent for me to raise this because in a similar way, our housing problems are not going to be easily resolved either. Even if we do have a Labour government imposed, which I'm sure Peter would be delighted about, that is not going to resolve our problems. We're going to end up with this council declaring a housing emergency in perpetuity to add to our climate emergency. And like I said in my budget speech, I've lived, this issue has been over 30 odd years in the making. Some members might like to make out it's been an issue since 2010, but it has actually been an issue for the last 30 years. I've lived in Crawley for over 30 years and I've seen the pressures on the cost of housing, whether it be to buy or to rent. And of course, this issue is not unique to Crawley. We are part of the greater sort of London and South East, and this is the part of the country that has been most affected by demand for housing. And temporary accommodation is a factor. It has come from the overall issue with the lack of supply of housing to meet demand. Now, in Crawley, we're limited by land supply, and we're currently building our final neighbourhood out within its boundaries. The Crawley census figures that I've put into the motion shows the difference between 2021 and the different 10-year periods before that. They will show that probably by now that since 1981, Crawley's population will have grown by 2/3. That is a huge amount, but nowhere in this motion is the word population growth or increase referenced at all. It just talks about demand. And of course, Crawley has attracted a lot of people to our town, usually for work at Gatwick Airport. It's been a huge draw into the town. And the amendments that I am proposing to the motion provides some very important facts as to what has been a key driver for the housing shortage that we have. Yeah, I do find it remarkable there's no mention of population growth at all. Why is that? And everything that's in this amendment is directly lifted from the Office of National Statistics report. There is no political slant in it whatsoever. It's meant to be impartial. And also the second part of the amendment is in terms of the percentage figures. That is ONS data. That is entirely accurate. And in the amendment from the report of the ONS on the 30th of January, it mentions our future population growth. And it does state very clearly that net migration to the UK is likely to be a big factor in our upcoming population growth. I don't think it matters who's in government, population is going to grow. And it is going to need politicians from the mainstream parties to have a national discussion about that. Because if we don't have that discussion, we create a vacuum and we leave that for those at the extremes of politics to have that discussion. And those people haven't necessarily got everybody's best interests at heart. But of course, it's not just net migration and whether
1 minute.
Thank you, increasing birth rate. It's also the fact that people move to Crawley from elsewhere. So myself and Councillor McCarthy, we're from the northwest of England. The current leader is from Bognor. The former leader is from Horsham, although you wouldn't know that if you looked at his Facebook videos that come on the sponsored post that keep going on about how he's from Crawley. Crawley attracts people into the town from elsewhere. And our population is going to continue to grow. The Conservative group want to be supportive and do whatever we can to help. Happy to lobby the government, happy to try to get more income to address this problem. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor McCarthy.
Councillor McCarthy, I believe you're seconding the recommendation, and in doing so, please confirm if you're wishing to reserve your right to speak later during the debate.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to formally support the proposed addition by Councillor Crowe to the Housing Emergency Notice of Motion, and speak now, if that's okay. I'm buoyed by the fact I was on a winning vote on the last one. Firstly, I'd like to say I was surprised that this motion was sent out as a press release ahead of it being voted on at this full council meeting. I understand you don't need our endorsement to pass this motion, but it still feels impolite to rub our noses in it. I'm sure this wasn't deliberate, so hopefully you can make amends by accepting our proposed addition. This amendment adds information from the Office of National Statistics, unedited, no changes, no spin, just facts. I accept that immigration is having an effect on our housing shortages, but the picture is made up of many years of undersupply, a shortage of houses being built today, internal UK relocation, economic migrants like myself, and population growth. We have a vibrant business district, an international airport, and many other facilities. We are looking to fill floors in this building, all of this in a town with low unemployment, which inevitably increases pressure on the housing stock. The figures from the ONS, which are unedited, I'll mention again, highlights the population growth numbers from both national and local. They highlight a major factor, and they're highlighting a major factor contributing to the housing pressures. I would urge members opposite to accept our amendment to move forward with a document that is more accurate, one that better articulates the reasons why we find ourselves with a shortage of houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lunnan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thank the leader and the Cabinet Member for Housing for bringing this forward. It's as I've said in OSC and other issues where we're discussing the budget, the temporary housing situation is very largely and quickly crippling this council's ability to do anything else. So I really do thank them for bringing this forward and agree with the sentiment of what they put forward. I just want to outline why I won't be voting for the amendment put forward by the opposition, and it's broadly quite simple. The issues that you talk about the growth of Crawley. Crawley has been growing ever since it was, created as a new town in 1946, and the stats that you provide don't explain why since 2021 we've suddenly hit a housing crisis with temporary accommodation, as Councillor Jones highlighted, going up 20-fold. Population growth has not suddenly spiked from 2021 to 2024 where we are now. There's the other issues that Councillor Jones highlighted, and might I suggest also, things like mortgage rates going significantly up, forcing people into homelessness due to incredibly bad government from our central government would also be a significant factor. But that's not actually directly mentioned in this housing declaration. But I thought it was very noble of Councillor Jones not to mention that, very restrained, frankly. But, and I'm just going to say one more, another reason I don't want to particularly talk about population growth, which is what you've done, is it borders on you sort of blaming immigrants for everything, which we've seen lots of parties do. Well, I mean, it's not a surprise you get that reaction, because that's the truth. That's your interpretation, not my interpretation. My interpretation is that by trying to put population growth down for everything and trying to blame immigrants for everything, it leads to divided communities. And Crawley's motto, ever since it's been Newtown, is, and you can see it on the wall up there, I grow and I rejoice. So for the party opposite to suddenly be saying, well, we don't want to grow anymore, we think we're full, is quite, you're living in homes that were built for people to come and live in, to come to Crawley, and we should continue that theme and not sort of suddenly say, nope, we're full up. We don't want you anymore. You know, it's fine for us, but it's not okay for you to come here. I think, you know, Crawley's always been a town that's welcomed new people in, and suddenly start saying population growth in Crawley is the bane of all our problems is sort of ignoring the plain facts of the fact that Crawley's been a very successful town because it's been attracting people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess.
Thank you. Don't be stung. My leg needs to be stretched. I find that very hurtful, Councillor Lunnan. The people on this side are not my turn, are not in the least saying what you think we're saying. You're putting words in our mouth, actually, and it's not necessary. Crawley New Town was built on the premises, whatever, that people would come here for homes and for jobs. Indeed, that's why we're here. My husband was a key worker, and as a newly married couple, we arrived in Crawley because we had a house, and a very good house. We untied it, and then it became a council property, and we didn't buy our council property. We preferred to move out and buy another one so that someone in need could have our council property. We can't keep up with the need and the growth. How do you manage to do it? Build house on house? Flats even higher? I hear what you say, and people are welcome here. Obviously, it is not the increasing of birth rate. That has dropped across the country. But in spite of what people think, it has dropped to 1 point something children. And young people are not having children because they recognise the pressures on the future of that child and also the pressures in the world as a whole. It is a number of people, and they're welcome here. Indeed, I help out at a local language area centre, which helps people to speak English if it's their second language. And I'm always impressed at the number of people who come from so many different walks of life. We talked to one from Iraq, who is a solicitor and wants to start work as soon as able. A young lady who's a surgeon and wishes to practice here. We're not stopping them. We're just saying that we are part of a problem which is probably in all areas. How are we going to resolve that problem without pointing fingers at one another? How are we going to work together to resolve this issue, to create buildings or temporary accommodation or whatever you want to call it, so that we can continue as an excellent town which is welcome, which everyone is welcome. I am proud that I live in Crawley, proud that we have all the people here, proud that we have such a different race and mix of people. Fantastic. And may it continue. But it's not only people from other countries who come here. There are jobs here. There's ability here. There's schools here. We have to find a way forward. And we're stuck in this landlocked piece of ground for no fault of our own. We're even thinking of building on floodplains, for goodness sake. No, we have to find a way forward which is satisfactory for everybody, so we can all continue to live together. And by putting down the numbers as it is, it shows the problem in black and white or red on my sheet. It shows the problem there. It shows clearly, it's not just us saying, oh, look, we've got no more buildings, we can't build anywhere. We're saying, look, we want to build and we're willing to build, but where do you propose we build if we want to grow our town? We do want to grow our town, there's nothing wrong with that, but where and how are we going to accommodate them? So please stop pointing fingers. We're all in this together. We're all willing and ready to admit we have a crisis or emergency, whatever you call it. We've had one for a long time. I've lived here for 55 years, not 30, and I've watched it change and I've watched it develop, and it can develop more, but we need to work together to find a way forward. Thank you.
Councillor Chris Mullins.
Thank you, Mayor. I sometimes look at what we've got in this country with the housing mess that we're in, and I feel some despair of how we've got to this situation. And I think back to governments when I think of this, because of the failure of governments to do systematic planning for their populations. The 1945 Labour government actually didn't go into that. They planned the new towns. They planned, and it was perhaps necessary after the bombings in the last war, but they planned new towns. They planned places where people could go and live, and they planned affordable housing, housing that people could actually afford to live in, and they offered people, young families, young couples, a house with a garden, and they, you know, most of them couldn't really believe what they were being offered. We had two lists once in Crawley, a newlyweds list and a general needs list. Both those lists moved, and a young couple would come back from honeymoon and simply walk into the town hall and pick the keys up to a house. As simple as that. It wasn't very complicated. Because we were forward planning, we had the new town and the type of housing that was being built. Now what's happening is that houses become an absolute commodity. It's an investment. It's a way of making money. And the net result of all of that is that ordinary people and ordinary wages are boxed out of housing altogether. They cannot afford it. There's not enough affordable houses for them to live in. Well, you can smug and laugh all you want, but if you're a young couple, none of my family are in Crawley anymore. They had to move out to get housing. They couldn't afford housings in Crawley. And that's the reality of the situation. Our town has become too expensive to live in. And the people that are coming here are really the people that can afford to buy houses. And even if you look at the surrounding towns around Crawley, the type of housing that's being built is all private housing, which is costing many hundreds of thousands to buy. And that's not the sort of housing that people can afford. So we have not allowed for housing for people who are doing ordinary jobs on ordinary wages. They've been cut out of the housing system. They relied historically on council housing, and they got good, healthy housing, and they were able to bring their children up successfully in good housing. Yeah, and I noted what Tim said, "I've grown, I rejoice," is our motto. But we have grown considerably, probably about 120,000 now, and we probably do need to change the town's boundaries at some time and grow further out. That's probably what's necessary. But it's no good if we build the wrong type of houses. Margaret Thatcher allowed the right to buy. And when she did that, a lot of people took advantage of that, and I don't blame them. The houses were very cheap. I mean, you could buy an ex-council house for £20,000 in those days, very cheap, and people could afford to do it. And I'm not saying that that was necessarily a wrong thing, but what we weren't able to do was to use the resources from those sold-off houses to build more houses. We weren't allowed to do that. So we didn't replace the houses that were sold. And consequently now, all those houses are in the hands of mostly private landlords who are renting it out and turning them into houses of multiple occupation to make money. That's what it's all about.
Councillor.
So I despair really at the state that our housing is. We are in a housing emergency situation. We are definitely in that. And what we need is government to sit down and do some strategic planning to say, what do we need to do? And part of the problem we're exaggerating here is we're part of the London overflow with high economic results here, which makes everything very expensive. When if you look at the country across it, it's unbalanced. And there's so many poor parts of the country where housing is still relatively cheap, but there's no work, there's no future there, and people can't move there. So that's the problem. We've got an unbalanced country. Everything's concentrated in the south. People come here because they can get jobs and careers, but the big stumbling block is the housing. Housing is a problem in the southeast, in the south generally. And until some government comes in and starts to say, we need to look at a strategic plan for housing across this country, nothing's going to change.
Thank you. Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a lot of sympathy for the content of the notice of motion, although I'll be voting for the amendment. I know, just based upon that last speech, there's a reference in the notice of motion to a shrinking private rented sector, but I think that's a very important point. And therefore, I welcome the fact that within the Labour group there are indeed some private landlords. I mean, good for them, and they help broaden the perspective of the Labour group beyond that which we just heard, which is no bad thing. I do think Councillor Lunham was absolutely right to mention the Crawley Borough motto, I grow and I rejoice, and just on a bit of reflection, the original Newtown master plan envisaged a population of 50,000. No one's really harking back to that. Obviously, we're well over 110,000, 120,000 now, but it's just quite instructive to reflect upon the original planning from the government of the day, which was quite realistic at that particular time. Now, this amendment, we're not asking you to do anything, which I thought you'd find quite appealing, but based on track record. We're just asking you to note something. So it's quite harmless, really. And the figures come from the Office for National Statistics. And I will draw out one, that in the 15 years from 2021 to 2036, there's a projection of 6.1 million UK population growth attributable to net international migration. That's straight from the ONS. In making that observation about migration, that's from the whole world. People migrate to this country from the whole world, and it has a lot of attractions for people. And it is true that migration can help clearly in providing public services. It can also, in the right way, increase gross domestic product, GDP. But that isn't the real measure. GDP alone is not the real measure of the relative, the prosperity of one country relative to another. And when I say prosperity, I mean the ability to provide public services as well. The real measure of a country's relative prosperity is GDP per capita, perhaps per household, perhaps per individual adult. And if migration is managed in the wrong way, that GDP per capita and the ability to provide public services in a timely way, they can both go into decline. And in a way, a country is something like a computer system. It can be overloaded. If you fire too much data at it over too short a time frame, the whole thing falls over. It happens here occasionally. So the point I'm making is it's not really about the absolute number associated with migration. It's the rate of migration is predicted to be too high for services to cope in a timely way. And that government needs to take note of. We need to take note of it for them to take note of it. And to be more local for a moment, migration is relevant. Our own population is increasing by about 1% per annum. We can't cope with that. And I'd remind you that this council, under a Labour administration, in fact, vigorously opposed the Forgewood development, but got overruled ultimately by central government. I think Forgewood was right to be built out. I didn't think so at the time, but I think with hindsight I was wrong about that. But I think it would be a mistake not to accept our...
1 minute, Councillor.
It would be a mistake not to accept our amendment when at the same time we're seeking to oppose the West of Ifield development being promoted by Homes England. And I say this to you, if we don't encourage central government to take note of the rate of population increase, not the absolute increase, then we could reach a situation where the West of Ifield development, which we're all opposing, will in time look like a minor bolt-on urban extension in comparison to what we will be facing. So that's the kind of housing crisis we could be heading for beyond anything referenced in this notice of motion. I urge you to accept this noting amendment. It's about realism and improving the effectiveness of our representations to central government. Thank you.
Very well said.
Thank you. Councillor Nawaz.
think she needs to do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think a lot has been said, but one thing I'm a little bit confused, and I think I might have misunderstood. On the budget discussion, the members opposite said we're probably not managing things very well. But on this discussion, it looks like we're doing really well as a Labour administration, where we have a vibrant business districts, a vibrant town centre, which just attracts people and bringing into it. So I don't know which one to believe on from that side. But thank you, Erich. These are very welcoming comments on the administration doing really well on that. And but you did mention business districts, which yes, you did. Thank you. You also mentioned lack of supply of the houses. One of the very important reasons why we need housing emergency from the planning and economic development side of things. Hugely important reason why a housing emergency declaration is so necessary is the voter neutrality restrictions, which has been imposed on us as a result of the government's failure to properly regulate the water industry and the industry's impact on sites protected by environmental legislation. Even without voter neutrality, Crawley is only able to meet 42% of its overall housing needs within the borough due to lack of land suitable for housing. Voter neutrality is a serious barrier to the new homes for residents that can be built on the land that is available for housing within the borough. It is either slowing down or even preventing outright new housing development in Crawley. This is on top of the particularly deep impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Crawley, combined with weak national economy and much higher inflation and construction costs, which we've all seen in the recent times. Horsham District Council is meanwhile using voter neutrality as a reason to justify the failure of the new local plan to continue to help meet unmet housing needs from Crawley. On its own, this sudden imposition without warning of voter neutrality restriction is another reason why Crawley declaring housing emergency, it is so justified. When you think about what it was before, in contrast with the situation before the voter neutrality, so prior to the voter neutrality being imposed on us by Natural England, Crawley was delivering significantly more new homes than the agreed local plan annual targets for new housing. In planning terms, this made Crawley one of the best performing authorities in the country for the delivery of new homes. From 21 to 2021, almost 3,500 new homes were delivered in the borough. From 2018 to 2021, the volume of new homes delivered against the government's housing delivery test was over 400% higher than the target number. And now with the voter neutrality, everything has been slowed down. So I think we're right to declare the housing emergency. We can't build the new houses, and this kind of mismanagement from the government on Natural England is affecting us and impacting us quite badly. Thank you.
Councillor Piggott.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. There you go. You're on. Am I there? I got there eventually. I'll make it very brief. I find it incredible how we've got a motion here which has just been added to, therefore suggesting support for the motion, that we've spent probably the last 20 minutes debating a non-debatable topic. I find that incredible. We're wasting our time here. We need to be focusing on the key things for our residents. We've got a lot to talk about. The important point, which I think Councillor Mullins raised earlier on, and I agree with him, is that it's important that we plan for our population, and therefore adding population to this motion adds accuracy. That's all we're trying to do, is making sure that what I think personally is a very good motion has full accuracy so we can move forward and be effective. Thank you.
Councillor Yasmin Khan.
Madam Mayor. Okay, whilst the immediate focus is rightly upon housing issues, we also need to be conscious of the ongoing social needs and community impacts of these needing houses. These are households that need support, but the resources available to provide that support is limited. When there is competition between communities for housing and support, this can create real tension. As a portfolio holder for public protection, It is the prospect of these tensions that really concerns me. We know there are those who would seek to exploit this. They have sought to do so before, but the residents of this town have not allowed them to do so. The pressures we are currently facing risk provide another opportunity for those who seek to promote tension. It's concerning to me that the Home Office, in taking the decisions it has not taken these risks into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Belbin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just would like to say that it is we are totally backing your motion, but we just want to bring in what we feel is driving this crisis, and it is the population growing so quickly in Crawley. Our homes aren't empty out there. They haven't been destroyed by war like they were in the 1940 to 1945 Second World War, which is why we had to have new towns, because so many houses had been flattened. So that's why the government set up the new towns. We have got a plan. We have got Homes for England as a body looking at where can we put new homes, because the government is recognising that the South East needs new homes. And we are saying, oh yes, but you've got to make sure the infrastructure is right, which I totally agree with. But we can't have our cake and eat it. We've got to accept that people are attracted to Crawley because it historically has always been the golden town with high employment thanks to Gatwick. And therefore, we've got to expect that we're going to need to have houses built on our border. And we've got to make sure we fight our corner to make sure that Crawley has the infrastructure like new schools and maybe a new hospital. And that's what our focus should be, and not just saying, no, we don't want this new housing, because we know our people need houses to live in. We do agree with you. And, you know, you say landlords are selling their houses, and I actually have a house that I inherited, and I actually rent that out, probably £300-400 a month less than the market, the agent tells me, because I happen to like the young lady in there that is a single mother and is working very, very hard. So not all landlords or ladies are the evil devil that you seem to paint us. So, you know, landlords do have a part to play in providing housing. Thank you.
Councillor Chariton.
Thank you. It's my first opportunity to actually say something in a debate. I felt I should, and I wanted to really to back up what Councillor Lunnan was saying earlier on. I get the idea that, I mean, you know, the population growth and lack of housing and so on do often go hand in hand, but I think we're being slightly disingenuous by throwing in population statistics into this motion, because it tends to suggest that the only reason that we've got such a high level of temporary accommodation is, oh, it's population growth, and what we really need to do is just build more houses and that'll solve it all. Well, it's not. As Councillor Lunnan said earlier on, you know, it's the past 5 years. And I think, honestly, you know, anybody over there with a conscience and has actually read various reports and so on will see that the temporary accommodation, the actual explosion in the need for temporary accommodation is very much a factor because people can't flipping well afford the accommodation they're in. There's two principal factors here. Firstly, they can't afford it. The rent rises have gone up horrendously, and that's as a result very often of mortgage interest going up. And you know, and lovely as it is that you want to be loyal to your side, you want to be loyal to your party, I think you're sort of slightly blinkered if you don't see the connection between policies that your government has carried through and the implications locally on the economy. Honestly, it's been dishonest not to see the effect, the impact of that. Firstly. Secondly, also the rise of Section 21s, where, and again, that's connected with your interest rate rises. Landlords, for one reason or another, private landlords in particular, I can entirely understand the rationale. It's that, I've got a mortgage rise that's, my mortgage has like doubled or whatever it's done in a very short space of time. I've got these people in who are paying a rent. I'm not, and then there's a gap. And I'm paying the difference between their rent and my mortgage. So, all right, sorry, you have to go then, because I want to get somebody in who can afford the rent so that I can cover my mortgage. That's a lot of what's going on, and it's quite disingenuous just to say merely it's population growth. Yes, population growth does have an impact, of course it does, but it's not the only factor, and we know it's not the only factor. And anybody over there who's actually taken the time and trouble to read any number of different reports, there was one that just recently from Crawley Citizen Advice that says exactly that. It's all there. It's all public. You can read it yourselves, and you can draw your own conclusions to that. And for that reason, we do need to be asking the government. We don't want these additional population statistics drawing us down a blind alley saying that, oh, well, it's population growth. What we need is a government to recognise that there is an issue here. Now, we can go on endlessly saying it's their fault, whatever. That's a matter for the past, if you will. What the government needs to do is recognise there's an issue and to provide support and to deal with the issue. Thank you.
Councillor Sue Mullins.
Thank you very much. Well, you can always tell when the general election is on its way when we start talking about population and immigration. You also seem very confused over there, because on one side of the room I heard that we're all having far too many babies and therefore the birth rate's going up and that's driving our homelessness problem. And on the other side we're told that our birth rate is actually dropping, which I'm quite sure is correct, because that's a trend in all of our Western countries, that populations are going down. And the populations are going down for many reasons, but one of them is economic, the fact that families cannot afford to have children and they cannot look into the future and see a good future for their children. This town has been described through me by somebody from the Citizens Advice Bureau as being a working town but with complex issues, and I think that's a very good description of what we have here. As my portfolio, I deal with an awful lot of the voluntary services within Crawley. A lot of them. We have a fantastic array of voluntary services who are in the front line providing help and service to our residents in Crawley who are in trouble. And an awful lot of our residents in Crawley are in trouble. You can approach any one of our voluntary people from Citizens Advice, Open House, Relate, Easter Team, 10 Little Toes, anything that's on the list, and they will tell you that their numbers have gone through the roof for people coming towards them or being referred to them for support. When we're talking about temporary accommodation, we're not talking about a lack of houses, we're talking about the fact that people can't afford to be in the houses they're in. They can't afford to pay the increased rents. It doesn't matter, I know people are doing 2 jobs, 3 jobs, they still can't afford to pay the rent, put food on the table and shoes on their kids' feet. Now, we talk about the statistics, and you talk about adding more statistics. We don't need more statistics. We need to start talking about the human cost to what's happening here. I hear every day now through the voluntary services of the pressure on their services, on their volunteers are getting burnout because they are asked to do more and more and more. And they are just asked to do things. They can't help the people they really need to help. Just to give you a couple of case studies. Relate. They talk about sofa surfacing. That's the hidden homeless. They're the people who are bunking out on somebody's sofa. This one this week, that mate over there next week, back to mum the week after, oh, mum's sick of me, I'll have to go somewhere else. Nobody counts those numbers, but they're there. And they really impact on places like Open House. Open House know that they have a huge number of people who are on the edge of coming to them because they're desperate, and it's just a matter of time.
Councillor Mullins, may I interrupt you, please? I'm going to interrupt you because we've got one more speaker after you on this item. But as the meeting has not been completed within 2.5 hours, I will put it to the vote whether the council wishes to continue or not. Do you want to carry on? Show of hands? I think that's pretty much everybody. Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Mullins.
Our Easter team do a fantastic outreach. They help families who are really struggling. They've seen this year a 260% increase in the number of parcels they're having to hand out, and a 153% increase in the numbers of households they're supporting. These are people who are absolutely desperate, who come once a fortnight to collect a carrier bag with the basics in, the very basics, cereals, pasta, tins of tomatoes, not the posh things, not the fancy things. Our household support fund, which we get from West Sussex this year, £250,000. We support families all over Crawley, giving them food support, fuel support, and help with homelessness. We don't even know yet whether we'll be any of that money will be forthcoming after the April. 10 Little Toes. I've mentioned this several times in this chamber. It's a fantastic baby bank and young children they support. I did actually suggest to Mr. Duncan Crowe that he should go and visit. I'm not sure he's found the time yet to have a visit. But they told me a really heartbreaking story. 4 o'clock, just as they were closing, a midwife came rushing in. Have you got a Moses basket? And they said, why? What's the problem? I've got a young couple. A young couple are in temporary accommodation. Now you think temporary accommodation, oh, they're all safe and warm and dry and everything's lovely. No, this was a B&B. They had one room with a double bed and a couple of cupboards in it. Hardly room to swing a cat. The new baby was 2 days old and had just come home from hospital. There was nowhere for the baby to sleep. The baby was sleeping in the bed between the couple. And as we all know, that is not best practice. They didn't have anywhere to, because they have no cooking facilities, because it's a B&B. Oh, sorry. Because it's a B&B, they have no cooking facilities, so nowhere to sterilise the bottles. Well, 10 Little Toes, of course, as usual, came up trumps and came up with everything that was needed. Pre-prepared formula, nappies and everything to support this family. That's one little family out of, I don't know how many it was earlier we were told, that are now sitting in places like that with no hope of getting out. When you talk about a housing emergency, those people are in a housing emergency now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now, and something needs to be done to sort that out. And we're not the only place in the country.
Thank you.
Crawley as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Irvine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I would just like to tell you that I will be reading some of what I say. That's because the subject tonight is too huge to keep it all in my head. And also, I may well repeat some of what others have said. And if I do, Madam Mayor, it's because it's worth repeating. I first became involved in housing in 1987, having been a councillor for 1 year. The then Labour Group Secretary, Councillor Bert Crane, said to me, sorry, Ian, I've got to take you off the planning committee and put you on the housing committee. And we want you to be vice chairman, because we have vice chairman in those days. And I mentioned that because my involvement in Crawley housing spans 5 decades, and yet I have never known this housing situation in this town as bad as it is today. Look at the figures in the motion, in the council's press release, and in Councillor Jones's tour de force of a speech. Temporary accommodation costs up from £456,000 to £5.7 million in 4 short years. In 2019, we spent £400,507 and 12 pence on temporary accommodation. In 2022, it was £4,705,044. And that's why I think that the ONS statistics, while absolutely irrefutable, are a complete distraction. They're a smokescreen. They're being used in a, make no mistake, Madam Mayor, a highly partisan, highly political way to try and shift the blame, if you like, for the current crisis away from what the actions of the government into things which are more nebulous and less exact. And the figures I've quoted, the millions of pounds that are spending on temporary accommodation, how long can we sustain that without much more financial help? Much more financial help from central government. We can't even begin to fulfil our obligation to house homeless people within our borough. And if your children have to go to unfamiliar schools, if they are uprooted, that is an emergency for them. And as of 31st of January, we had 78 households homeless households housed outside Crawley. And that's 78 too many in my book. And I would like at this point to pay tribute to our hard-working homelessness officers and to organisations like Crawley Open House and Giving Back Crawley, without whose efforts the social effects of homelessness would be even worse in this town. We're caught in a perfect storm of no-fault evictions, cost of living increases and competition amongst local authorities for accommodation, which drives the costs up. And if anyone doubts that no-fault evictions are a factor in all this, as Councillor Lunnon and Councillor Cheriton have already described, then why is Michael Gove belatedly, 4 years after the Conservative government said they were going to do it, promising to outlaw Section 21 evictions by the end of this Parliament? He must be acknowledging that there is some fault in government policy there. And I haven't even mentioned yet the 2,430 people on our housing waiting list, facing an average wait of 2 to 6 years, longer if they're deemed to be a low priority. I sometimes wonder that the housing crisis has sprung up in such a short space of time that maybe the government was taken by surprise at the sudden increase in homelessness, and maybe they hope that it could just as suddenly decrease. But to be quite honest, Madam Mayor, I can't see any likelihood of that happening. It's time for the government to stop hoping, if that's what they're doing, and start acting. Failing to act will mean immense consequences for our town, for our council, and for our country.
1 minute.
And I second.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. I'm madly scribbling because it's driving me round the bend. Obviously, we are, we realise, we all realise that we're having difficulties in Crawley. There is a housing crisis. There are some awful things going on, and we do know that. And, as a mathematician, figures are key. There's little point in writing into the government without including the data. Data is everything, which shows the upward trend. It shows how our population is increasing. It shows how it's going to increase in the future. Without that data, it's just words. Numbers are, figures are key. And if our population is increasing by 1,000 people a year, whether they're coming in from Bolton or from Haywards Heath or wherever they're coming from, those people are putting pressure on the houses. And that pressure is putting pressure on everyone because everyone's trying to find somewhere to live. They're trying to find somewhere to buy or to rent or just to be safe. But it's those numbers that are important because if without the numbers, it's just words. And that is why it's so important to have this data there for anybody that you write to see, yes, Crawley's population has increased 11% in the last 10 years. It's probably going to increase 10-11% in the next 10 years. We need to show that data, and that's why this amendment is there, so that we've got the data, to show people the figures, the numbers of how the population is increasing. Because the increasing population is putting pressure on the cost of housing, the rents, everything. And that's why it's so key to have this amendment in the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Pritchard.
Yeah, just a quick point I've noticed is the top two main blocks of text. The first is the national population statistics, giving a breakdown between the various year groups, and the Crawley Borough Council population statistics. They're totally unrelated facts. There is no reason for the first set of those numbers to be relevant to Crawley whatsoever. There's no correlation between the two sets of numbers. You can look at UK population all you like, but certain areas will grow larger, some will shrink, even with a growing national population. They're just thrown in for absolutely no purpose. And I noticed a common theme. When Councillor Lunnan earlier mentioned you picked up on immigration as one of your first words, all of you recoiled in horror, but nearly every single one of you has mentioned immigration. This is about immigration for you guys, isn't it? Well, nearly every single one of you has mentioned immigration as a core part of your contribution to the discussion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor McCarthy.
I just wanted to say that the reason them figures are in there, it's because it was lifted as a block from the Office of National Statistics, so the figures were grouped accordingly, if you like. So it's not like, and like I said, them figures were untouched, so it's not like they've been massaged in any way, shape or form to sort of give a misleading picture. They're figures from the ONS. I mean, I think you don't want them figures in there because it detracts from the narrative that you want to put on, the spin you want to put on this notice of motion. Thank you.
Councillor Irvine. Okay, right. There are no further speakers. Councillor Jones, do you wish to use your right to reply? And in doing so, please...
I do, Madam Mayor, thank you. Councillor Crowe, I know you probably didn't mean it, but I don't share the levity on the subject that you began with. I don't use words like emergency lightly in this chamber. And as Councillor Lunnan said, I don't recall this problem 15 years ago, or even 10, or even since 2021. Addressing the Conservative amendment, Madam Mayor, I think it's a massive distraction, and I suspect deliberately so. I'm of the view that while there has been population growth across the UK, the evidence is this is not what is causing the local problems here in Crawley or driving the rent rises, and it's pretty desperate for them to attempt to suggest otherwise. We've had every random reason thrown at us tonight by the Conservative benches, which is a little bit dispiriting. Now, while population growth and housing supply and cost can be linked, what we are seeing in Crawley is rents becoming unaffordable, not necessarily because the stock isn't there, but because the soaring cost of living means people can't afford to make ends meet and pay the rent. And too many private landlords are exiting the market because they can't afford the mortgage payments. And there is no one else out there except the council to pick people up when they fall through the net. Most of which, I'm afraid, is down to the disastrous actions and financial mismanagement of the economy by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in their brief time in charge of the government, as well as the continued suppressed state of the economy before and after that classic intervention. The Conservative group might want to forget what they've done, but I'm afraid none of the rest of us can. This can be added to by the government's continuing neglect in inaction, which is forcing this council to declare the housing emergency tonight. Councillor Lanza seems to suggest that my stance on the West of Ifield development proposed by Homes England is somehow contradictory. Not true, Councillor Lanza. He and his colleagues might think that building over the Ifield Golf Course and the beautiful countryside surrounding it is a good idea. I don't know. But if they do, I reckon about 99% of people in Crawley disagree with them. It should go without saying that new housing has to be built in the right place as well. Now, I have to say, let's address migration because it's been raised quite a lot tonight. And it feels like some dog whistle politics going on from the opposite side. We aren't trying to exaggerate migration, internal or external, nor are we trying to scapegoat anyone. Just that the Home Office and the government have to recognise what they've put in place locally. And I feel that the search for convenience in terms of locating hotels, of which we have many here being near an airport, has trumped more responsible considerations by the Home Office. Just to give some context here, of the 494 households in temporary accommodation, the number of households at present that are not UK national or from the Crawley, living in Crawley already is very small. There are 19 households from asylum dispersal, 15 from the Chagossians and 2 from the Afghans. As you can see, this is not significant at the moment, and it's perhaps worth clarifying that. I think Councillor Nawaz spoke about water neutrality and our specific circumstances, which exacerbates the problem we have here compared to other regions. Councillor Khan is right to express her concerns, and I agree with her. Councillor Sue Mullins talks about the real human stories, and Councillor Irvine pretty much summed up everything else that needed to be said about why this is important. So once again, Madam Mayor, I urge this council to declare a housing emergency and to send a clear message on behalf of residents to the government to do what it was elected to do and actually address the problems we are facing. We may be one of the first councils in England to make this call, but I do not believe we will be the last. I formally move.
I call for a vote on the proposed Conservative amendment to Notice of Motion 1, motion on declaring a housing emergency as set out on page 23 of the order paper. Can I have a show of hands in favour, please? And against? Any abstentions? Right, thank you. The amendment has fallen. There's 15 for and 19 against and no abstentions. I call for a vote on substantive motion of Notice of Motion 1, motion on declaring a housing emergency. Is that agreed, or would you like a vote on it? Thank you. The next item is Councillors' question time. We have 30 minutes for this item, and we will start with the written questions submitted by Councillor Piggott, Councillor Crowe and Councillor Lanza, as detailed on page 17 in the supplementary agenda, which includes the responses. Councillor Piggott, do you wish to ask a supplementary question?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I'd just like to start by thanking Councillor Chris Mullins for his response. And I understand the limitations in terms of the commercial discussions and the public comments, so thank you for those. Indeed, it's extremely helpful to have this overview of the current situation regarding Goff's House, which is why I asked the question in the first place, as there's been many residents asking and indeed concerned as to what's going to happen with this property. Proactive and clear communication, as appropriate and within the limitations indicated, are important, and I'm pleased that we're now able to share this with residents whom we represent. May I recommend that with this, and as with all significant locations within the town, that clear and proactive communication with residents is maintained moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Quite clearly, in one sense, I was very pleased to get the opportunity back in my portfolio of that house, because you can look at that house and say it's got potential in many ways, some park use, some business use, and etc. So we have not made any final decisions on the house yet. I have written to a few queries that have come in on emails, answered them back, explaining that it's, you know, the house in itself has got a lot of dilapidation and problems. We have not managed as yet to settle the payments due from the Ministry of Justice in handing the house back to us, and that we are ongoing. I wouldn't want to get into the commercial discussions or ideas at the moment, but it's an ongoing situation. We're keen to see in the longer term success for Goffs Park House. That would be our ambition, but it's not going to be cheap. I mean, the state of that house and what's been presented back to us is going to be quite expensive. So if you're talking to your constituents about it, you're going to have to say, look, you're going to have to be patient, it's going to take time, and we've got to look at what financial resources we can acquire for it. So even if we get an acceptable agreement with the MAJ in the near future, and I hope we do, that won't really solve our problems in what might be conversion needs inside and etc. To try and get some sources of income as well for the house. So it's an ongoing situation, one that we can't rush. It will take time. That's why we haven't put it into the Goffs Park business plan. We've kept it separate because we want to move ahead with that business plan as a separate thing. But bearing in mind that we will be looking at some time on that working group at the house.
Thank you. Councillor Crowe, do you wish to ask a supplementary question?
I don't, Madam Mayor, but I would, when we get to verbal questions, would like to indicate to speak then.
Councillor Lanza, do you want to ask a supplementary question?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Irvine for his answer so far to my written question. So part of your answer refers to a private pack agenda document for full council 17th of July 2019, meaning that this information is, on the face of it, inaccessible to the public and the media. Now, the decision was to use housing revenue account funding to top up sick pay arrangements for housing subcontractors. And so my question to you is if you remain proud of a decision to use tenants' money to support the terms and conditions of private housing subcontractors, why is the answer to my question still put in private Part B, which is inaccessible to the public, and why was the decision in fact ever put in Part B, private, inaccessible to the public?
Madam Mayor, thank you for your question, Councillor Lanza. And I take it that the question is really just why is this in Part B? And the answer to that is that it's not actually my decision whether it's not in part, whether or not it's in Part B. It's a decision for the paid service. But I would say that in terms of the original decision, I think it was the right thing to do. We don't want the idea that people doing work on behalf of the council should have to come to work when they're sick because they can't afford to go off sick. Ideally, I probably won't be cabinet member for housing when the contracts are renegotiated, but when that does happen, I would hope that the terms of the contract could be renegotiated to include better sick pay. But of course, if that happens, then that could well put up the cost of the contract. So the cost of the contract and the cost of providing it in another way might actually end up exactly the same. And I might say that you know, I've not had any detrimental reports about the use of this six-pay scheme since it's come into action. And in the last 4 years, you know, we've managed to repay the overpaid rents to council tenants for a mistake which arose from the previous administration. We've started to shift temporary tenancies back into secure tenancies. We're providing extra staff to conduct rolling surveys of our stock and much else besides. So all in all, I don't think we've done anything that we can't be proud of.
Thank you. I'll now open the floor to any members wishing to ask a question of either Cabinet members or committee chairs. Please note that where possible we will rotate requests between parties. Councillor Crowe, I believe you want to speak.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. My question is for Councillor Yasmin Khan. I listened with interest to your announcement earlier this evening, and we can't ask questions on that at that time, so I'll ask you a question now. I received an invite, as indeed all Borough Councils did, to this event you're holding in early March. I just wanted to sort of ask you, what do you hope to get out of this event? What do you think it can achieve that is not going to be achieved from public consultations? For example, the Safer West Sussex Partnership has had a public consultation on community safety in the autumn of last year. Thank you.
Councillor Yasmin Khan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, first of all, I'm really hoping that people do come forward and they do take advantage of this event and talk to us and raise their concerns, because when people always ask, and when you try and do something for them, they never turn up. So I'm hoping they will turn up and they will come and raise the concerns, and the police will be there, we will be there, and there's going to be... we're trying to get some young people involved so they can come and see the impact of drugs and that type of life, what that has on people. So I'm hoping that this will be something really positive and change some lives as we can, and trying to gain trust, because I have been going around speaking to different as you may be aware, I am a charity worker as well, and I've got volunteer groups. So I have been speaking to people on that as that role and as my cabinet role, and there are communities that I've been reaching to which are hard to reach to, and they are willing to come forward, and I think I'll gain their trust, so they are willing to come forward and ask questions and see how we can help them. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Okay. As the meeting... Sorry. Do you want to ask a supplementary? Go on then, very quick.
Her question. I hope to be able to come along and observe for myself, and hopefully it will be a successful meeting, but obviously the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Thank you.
Thank you. As the meeting has still not been completed, I'll now put it to a vote whether the council wishes to continue for a further 30 minutes. Can I have a show of hands, those in favour? Okay, those against? Any abstentions? Two abstentions. Yeah, majority wants to carry on, so that's it, you can have that bit back. Councillor Chariton.
I wanted to ask Councillor Jones, I understand there are some rumbles about something happening with the Ask building. I don't know if he has further information about that at all. How very astute of you.
Busted.
Yeah. Drat, yeah.
Councillor Chariton, you're very perceptive about things going on in the high street. I can confirm that the property has been on the market for quite some time now, since Ask went into administration during lockdown. So I am pleased to be able to share with the council that we've received a very recent offer from a restaurant operator, which has been considered by officers at the moment. And with prevailing winds, fair wind, hopefully we will successfully get a new tenant in there, and it'll be good to see the building being used, which was what we always wanted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pendleton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is for Councillor Khan as the Cabinet Member for Public Protection. We've spoken about the PSPO for the car parks tonight. I was just wondering whether, off the top of your head, it might be possible to get a brief update on how the car cruising PSPO is going.
I think so far we haven't had any complaints and we haven't had any charges, so I will definitely look into that, but no, so far there hasn't been any fines issued. And if you're talking about Pound Hill, I am aware of that, and Gatwick. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question's to the Leader of the Council and or the Cabinet Member for Housing. We have on Saturday the second community consultation of the possibility of some small-scale housing developments on the Bristol Close. I'm wondering, knowing that there is a strong desire from the residents to feel that their voices have been heard, whether one or other of you or both of you might be able to come along to that public consultation with myself so that the residents feel that they're being listened to. Thank you.
Councillor Irvine.
Myself on this, I can't arrange what Councillor Jones does in his spare time, but I mean, if it would help, I would be happy to come along, but I would assure anybody that whether I or my Councillor Jones is there or not, their voices, if they make their voices heard, if they go through the consultation process, their voices will count. And of course, it is a consultation. Nothing has been decided, and I would urge people, if people are concerned one way or the other about the scheme, then please let the council know. Take part in the consultation. Then we can consider all points of view and decide what we're going to do in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess.
Is that me? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is for the Leader of the Council. I was very interested to see that we've got a tree strategy. Pity we can't have a strategy for parking on grass villages. Anyway, back to the tree strategy. I was a little concerned when I attended the OSC recently, where the tree strategy was discussed, that there appeared to be some confusion as to what was actually being promoted. So I'm asking you exactly. Councillor Jones, the Council, you did appear to be a little bemused and a little confused at the question offered. Namely, will all trees on our land, once removed, be replaced? Like for like, one for one, native to this country, and CBC's trees, or CBC trees only, I can't get that out tonight. Or other trees on our land, would they be replaced? Or would such removal of such trees be left for natural regeneration? I hope I've made that clear, because I'm somewhat tired now and getting a bit muddled up in my speech.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ordinarily, it would be the Cabinet Member for the Environment who would answer issues relating to trees, but in fairness, I was deputising for the Cabinet Member that evening at OSC, so it is my words. Please don't be confused or think I was confused, Councillor Burgess. I think the question was related to potentially non-viable trees that might have sprung up in an area that wasn't necessarily ideal growing territory for the trees. The council is very committed to maintaining the tree canopy right across the borough. We are constrained to a certain extent as far as we only really have control over the trees that are on our land and our property, and inevitably that involves working with a lot of private owners and indeed other landowners, including other public authorities. I really don't feel that there was any attempt to obfuscate what the council's trying to do, which is just ensure we've never had a proper tree strategy that's written down that members could look at that was accessible to members of the public, as far as I'm aware. But we have a great story in this borough to tell about trees, and I think that was what it was about. Inevitably, there will always be pressure on where it can be grown. We're very keen that there's going to be a community-based facility where members of the community can actually call for trees in an appropriate area, but of course it would have to be an appropriate area, and indeed we'd probably have to have control over the land in one shape or form as well. The good news is that there's Section 106 money there, more than enough to cover the costs of any tree purchasing and planting. So we very much want to hear from councillors, and we very much want to hear from members of the public, I think, so and make Crawley even more green and pleasant and bushy, if dare I say, or whatever the whatever the arboreal equivalent a word for that is for that. Thank you.
Very quickly.
I just worried about the trees in Hawthwood. That's our land. The trees are being decimated. Will they be left? Who will replace them? The Forestry Commission, or will we replace them? And will it be left to generate itself, which will take absolutely decades to do? Thank you. That's it, basically.
Do you want me to? Thank you again. I'll answer because I answered the first one. Councillor Burgess, I'm sure you're aware that very sadly there's a lot of ash trees in Hawthwoods, and it is ash dieback, and the council hasn't taken the knocking down of any of these trees lightly. It's heartbreaking for all of us, I think, to know how many have gone. It has been done to try and safeguard the other trees. It is a brutal disease. It isn't going to kill off quite as many as the arboriculturists originally thought when it first reached this country, but even so, it is going to mean that a lot of trees go. I think that we have a problem here in that the Hawth woodland is ancient woodland as well, and there are restrictions. Also, I think whenever there's been some kind of disease or pestilence that takes place, and there has to be a removal, our tree surgeons are very clear that we can't put anything in for some period of time. So perhaps we could take this offline, Councillor Burgess. I very much enjoy talking about trees, but it is quite a technical area in itself. But I'm sure we can work with Councillor Noyce and yourself if there's anything you have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard.
Yeah, my question's to the Cabinet Member for Environment, Sustainability and Climate Change. Councillor Noyce, with some improvements already made to the footpath along the Gatwick Stream between the Snooty Fox Public House and Hazelwick Avenue, there's been a lot of tidying and smartening up, which I believe wasn't done by the council. But will you commit to keeping it clean, keeping it tidy, and also repairing the fences along that walkway to make it safe and a pleasant place to walk?
Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. I will be in communication with the patch team about that, and I'll be seeing them soon and pass on your your question and comments with the intention of trying to fulfil that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to Councillor Jones. I'm referring to page 6. That's of the Labour Party manifesto for Crawley for 2023, which states we will not outsource any further local services. And yet, during the current council year, we've had officer reports and presentations which have indeed contemplated and speculated upon the outsourcing of council services. I don't think I can be any more specific because they were in private part B yet again. But so what are your intentions here? That's the question. Are you standing by your manifesto or and if not, why have you got officers working up ideas and options for the outsourcing of services? So are you planning to assume that a dose of pragmatism and abandon your manifesto, or is your manifesto true?
I think I'd have to have a look at what we wrote precisely in our manifesto, Madam Mayor. I think the specific commitment was that wherever practicable and possible and in line with what we were attempting to do, that we would certainly look at insourcing services. However, we have many existing services at the moment where they are currently outsourced, and I suspect that's what Councillor Lanza is referring to. So I can't help but refer back to the elephant in the room, which is that the council obviously has to live within its means, and there's an awful lot of things I'd like to do in this borough, but issues relating to money are an issue. So as a result, we take decisions on a case-by-case basis.
If you're very, very, very brief.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The precise remark I'm referring to is explicit. We will not outsource any further local services, and yet, again, we've had reports which have contemplated at that. I agree with the leader that there was also you'd do what you could to bring back in-house, but my central point remains the statement is we will not outsource any further local services, which seems to be contrary to the activities suggested by some reports this council year.
Thank you. How much do we have?
We've got 6 minutes.
We've got 6 minutes left, so can you please keep your questions and your answers as brief as possible, and there will be no supplementary questions. Councillor Ayling.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is for Councillor Chris Mullins. The sandpit at Viewbush Pocket Park has been out of action. Can you please let us know when it was being repaired, please? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I mean, that's going to happen. It's being repaired. Unfortunately, it was closed due to structural damage, and that structural damage makes it unsafe for children to play in. And so until we've completed the repairs and obviously refilled it with fresh sand, I haven't actually got a time scale for that. I could check that and let you know. But the intention is to rebuild it, refurbish it, and get back to normal as soon as possible. I'll save time. I'll sit down. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You would please to know my question is for you. If you remember, in a previous full council, I asked about the portrait of our great King, Charles III. Today, I walked past your parlour and I saw that portrait on display. Very nice, very beautiful. In most councils, we have these portraits in council chambers or public view where general public residents of town can see and enjoy. I would request, would you consider that displaying in a public view And if not, why not? I know your views about monarchy. That's why I would like to know why not.
The one that's in the council chamber, as far as I'm aware, is going to be staying there. But there has been another one issued, which we are in the process of applying for. And that's going to be the standard one that will go into the public places. It's kind of the equivalent of the Antigone portrait of Her Majesty. And as far as I'm aware, that's all in the process of being ordered to be framed, to be put wherever. I would assume, I would hope, in the public domain. Okay. Councillor Ashraf.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to Councillor Nawaz. It's about the local plan. I understand now the local plan has been concluded. Can he update us how did it go and whether we have any initial response from the inspectors?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Ashraf. Yes, we had initial letter come from inspectors. As we probably aware, our local plan has gone through intensive series of examination led by 2 planning inspectors from the government. And I'd like to commend our officers on their professionalism and the brilliant way with which they coped with the hearing sessions and the sheer volumes and breadth of questions they had to deal with. So very well done to them. So initial letter does have some initial good news for us. And inspectors have confirmed that our local plan is legally compliant with the duty to cooperate requirement with other authorities. They ask for us, for the soundness, they ask for some main modifications. And our officers have worked up very quickly with the main modification and out for consultations already. So consultation has begun from 12th of February, which ends on 25th of March. Hopefully, subject to the outcome of that consultation and to the final report expected from the planning inspectors, sometimes before the end of May. We are hoping to be able to bring a local plan to Cabinet and to full council in summer for consideration to adopt the plan formally as policy.
Fantastic news.
Yeah, that's a great news, which is our plan was held by, obviously, voter neutrality was one of the big thing, but now we are in a position to which approve that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I'm afraid that's the end of councillors' question times, with apologies to those who didn't actually manage to ask their questions. So, right. I call upon the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Kiran Khan, to move receipt of the reports of the meetings as set out in Agenda Item 6 on page 43 in the associated supplementary agenda.
Hello. I move that the reports of the Planning Committee, Licensing Committee, Overview and Scrutiny Commission, Audit Committee and Cabinet be received. Is that agreed?
Thank you. There are no further items for debate, and as there is also no further supplementary items of business, I declare the meeting of the Council now closed. Thank you very much and good evening.